Hi everybody, welcome to Chess 24. We're trying this one more time at the top of the show to bring you some live coverage of round 7, the last round from Dortmund. I'm Macaulay Peterson, sitting in again for Lawrence Trent, and with me is Grandmaster Ilya Zaragatsky. And we hope Jan Gustafsson will be joining us later to have a look at the last round games from Dortmund. We had just started having a glance at the Caruana-Leko draw, which finished just a few minutes ago. And Caruana, of course, securing the first place in the tournament with a very impressive score, keeping his rating up over 2,800. So let's go back to the top. For those who were joining us a few minutes later or may have missed your first analysis of this Leko, this Berlin defense from Caruana.
Right, so basically I'll have to repeat all of the wise stuff that I have said before, but that's not a problem, and I'm happy to do so. Yeah, apologies also from on my part from on the technical issues, but okay, let's just dive right into the game, Leko versus Caruana. And actually, Peter Leko, even if he would have won against Fabiano Caruana, there's nothing he could have done. Fabiano was the designed tournament winner even before the round, no matter what would have happened. So actually, yeah, the draw has not even been necessary for him to secure the winning of the tournament. Let's still check this game very shortly, very briefly. E4, E5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6, short castle, and knight takes e4. Of course, again, this fashionable line of black trying to play the Berlin Wall, which appears after d4, which is the main move here. Knight e6, takes on c6, takes on c6, d takes e5, knight f5, exchange of queens, and then we have this highly frequently discussed ending, which has been seen in tournament practice over the last 15 years, hundreds and thousands of times, and also has been played in this tournament quite a couple of times, with black arguing that his pair of bishops and his solid position can make up for the pawn minority on the king's flank, which we see here, 4 against 3 pawns, and the double pawn on the queen side. Leko, however, he chose to play rook e1 here, another sideline, which, however, also has been played by many players in the past. Knight e6, and here white just takes on e5, with the idea, of course, being that knight takes b5 would be everything but advisable, since after a knight takes c6 there's a discovered check and the queen is going to drop off the board. So bishop e7, that's the main move here. Now the bishop on b5 is hanging, bishop e1, exchange on e5, and the short castle. And normally, if black manages to solve his development problems by removing his knight, mostly to f5, then playing d5 and developing his bishop after a preliminary bishop f6 oftentimes, then the position is totally equal. White, however, tries to make use of his development advantage and to claim a very, very slight edge. However, it seems that this position is quite equal after all. So knight c3, knight e8. Here the knight just simply goes to e8, where it can, from where it can head to f6 later on, or maybe to d6 after the pawn has gone to d5. So d4, bishop f6, rook e1, and d5. Knight e2, knight e6. Nothing special, especially exciting going on here. c3, rook e8, just normal development moves. Bishop f4, c6, knight g3, exchange of rooks along the e-file, g6, and well, it pretty much seems like Peter Leko doesn't have any big ambitions in this game. He's pretty much happy with the draw, landing on a +1 score, which is quite decent, and not trying to become unshared second or something, just happy with his tournament so far. So bishop h6 is what happened, knight f5, another exchange of minor pieces. And, well, the position obviously is very, very plain here. Just 2 queens and 4 bishops remaining on the board. Very symmetrical structures, so it was kind of clear that the game is going to end in a draw here. So queen f4, queen e1, and here both opponents had to calculate a little bit. Of course, white can also exchange queens here like this. Queen e5 takes, but probably after f6, black is doing pretty fine, so that's not a problem. Instead, Liko chose to play queen to c7, attacking the bishop on d7 and the pawn on b7. But it turns out that after bishop e6, queen takes b7, and then just queen e3 check, there's nothing white can do to escape a perpetual after king g2. Of course, the king has to guard this pawn on f3. King g2, queen d2 check, king g1, the opponents simply repeated moves. After queen d2, king g3 doesn't really help because the least black has is queen e1 check, attacking also the bishop on f1. And after king g2, of course, there's another check on d2. So, not a very exciting game, but good enough for both. Caruana already won the tournament, ending with another draw, and ending up with 5.5 out of 7 points, and Liko also with a draw and 4 points. He can still be caught up on the second place by Arkady Naidic and Georg Mayer, who are facing each other, as it turns out.
Yeah, Naidic still has a chance to pull into clear second, but at least at the moment he seems to be quite at a disadvantage against Mayer.
Right, a very exciting game. I have checked that before. That's the current position on the board. Let's see how they got there. So Mayer opened up with knight f3, knight f6, then they transposed into a King's Indian classical mainline with e5 and knight c6, knight goes to e7, knight e1, one of the main moves here. Also b4 and knight d2 have been quite fashionable for many, many years. Knight e1 is another main move here, striving to go to d3 to support the c5 lever and also to support the pawn, the pawn chain in the center with f3, and then to be able to recapture an on e4 after black has played e5. So knight d7, preparing f5, and also kind of playing c5 a little bit more complicated for white. Knight d3, f5, f3, f4. This is all mainstream theory here. If you are interested in the King's Indian, by the way, there's a brilliant series by Robin van Kampen, which he has recorded for Chess24. You can find that on our websites. I have watched it myself, and I have learned a lot there, actually. I was kind of tempted to play the King's Indian myself. It's a repertoire series, actually, for King's Indian players as black. And it's very instructive, and he has very interesting ideas. It's really not so bad. Have you watched it, Mikołaj?
I not only watched it, I post-produced a lot of it, and yeah, it's available on the video series under the Learn menu at the top of your screen. It's quite a large series, 32 videos, I believe.
Yeah, it's for really ambitious players, I guess. And there are some cutting-edge lines. It's the current state of theory so far, and Robin himself, of course, is a very strong player. He works a lot on his chess, and you can learn quite a lot from this video series. So, big recommendation from my part. From yours too, right?
Yeah, and now I wish on the top of my head I don't know what he recommends in this position. But
neither do I.
but well, maybe at the break we'll have a quick look at that, and then
right.
we can come back and give his verdict.
It's well possible that we are still in one of his lines here, actually.
I think it's likely, actually.
Yeah, I don't know if he recommends 97 here or some other move, but probably he does, actually. And he likes to play, I know that, he likes to play a4 whenever the opportunity arises, and then just to go on and mate white with this typical King's Indian kingside attack.
Yeah, I mean, one interesting thing about the King's Indian as it comes up it's a rarity at the really top level, but there are a few guys who play it with some regularity, notably Nakamura. And one of the interesting observations that I've seen that also Robin makes the point in his series is that it's one opening where computers are not as directly helpful, at least without having some understanding of the nuances of the opening yourself, because it's a closed position and because it can be so complicated, and you have to have, sometimes your attacks are working or not based on one tempi or something, but in long-range plans are much more important as well. And so that's, I think, one reason why some of the players who do play the King's Indian tend to favor it, because they feel like their innate knowledge of the types of positions that arise is an advantage.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a very special opening. Not only in that respect, but also it just gives black very good chances to play for a win. So if you're facing an inferior opponent, at least on paper, and you really want to win, then it's a good weapon. And computers don't really understand those positions that well. They are close, they just see this advantage in space, and then they immediately give an advantage for white. It's not that easy, however, and if you're a tactical player and you like to attack your opponent on the king side, then it's just the right opening. However, there have been claims that there are a lot of lines where white can actually claim a small advantage without knowing too much theory, and there's not only one of those lines, but a couple of them, and black has to know a lot of theory. I think it was even Garry Kasparov who exclaimed that and stopped playing King's Indian at some point, because he used to be quite a big how do you say adversary?
Advocate.
Advocate, yes.
Yeah, no,
It's not
of course.
Mother tongue.
I think a lot of
advocate,
people,
yeah. He used to be a big advocate of this opening also. Rajabov comes to mind.
Well, Kasparov originally, and then in more recent years, Rajabov and Nakamura have, I think, kind of rehabilitated the King's Indian at the top level a bit after a period of decline in popularity.
Even still, even though it's not one of the favorite openings on the top level, on amateur levels or on, well, semi-professional levels, it's still very, very popular.
Yeah, sure.
And you would face it a lot of times if you play d4. So yeah, very interesting opening, and I'm pretty sure both opponents were still in their preparation here, still in the book at least, even if they have not prepared this very position for this particular game. So f3, f4, this typical pawn structure of the King's Indian. As already mentioned, black is trying to lever with g5, g4 inside a kingside attack, and white, of course, is trying to get c5 in and to get some action on the queen side going. So bishop d2, h5, already preparing g5, g4. I think here, I have not seen this position in Robin's series, I think, so that's already a line which he doesn't cover. Probably he has some other recommendation for black. I would be curious to check that, so maybe let's do that in a break. So rook c1, g5, c5, and play is becoming very concrete here, since after d takes c5, b4, white is sacrificing a pawn just to speed up his kingside, his queenside ambitions, and to create some counterplay there. And the idea is actually that after c takes b4, it's not knight takes b4, which has been planned by white, but knight to b5. So at this very point in time, white is even 2 pawns down. However, attacking the chronically weak square on c7, and of course planning to take back on b4, preferably with the bishop, which would even more activate his pieces. And yeah, here it becomes very concrete, and c6 is what black played here. Well, it's becoming not only concrete but also very complicated. Of course, d takes c6 is nothing that white should be striving for, because after knight takes c6, black has pretty much no big problems. He will probably be able to develop his pieces, maybe put the knight to f6 or to b6, then develop his bishop, and at some point maybe even play b4. Still, white has some counter play. He might take on b4, or put the knight to d6. Again, a lot of arrows that I'm painting here. But also black has the resource of queen b6 check in some lines. So that doesn't look quite as convincing for white, but Meyer's idea was to play d6 here, and now it's getting totally crazy. So let's see. c6 obviously attacked the knight on b5, but white just reacts by counterattacking the knight on e7. So there is still this idea of queen b6 check, but what happens if we just take the knight with the pawn simply on b5? Well, then d takes e7 happens, and after queen takes e7, which probably is not the best move here already, but you should maybe try to play queen b6 and rook e8. But here, of course, also white is much better due to knight d5 and then knight b4 and then knight d5, defending this pawn and attacking the knight and also threatening a fork here. It's kind of fun to paint all these arrows, threatening to fork on c7.
Especially with the knights, they make these nice.
The knights are beautiful pieces, especially in blitz games. They're so much more powerful than bishops because everybody keeps missing forks all over the place. You should really remember that.
You know
Knights in blitz games.
Splits.
Yes, I know that from my Geschwätzblitz. I know that from my blitz career, which is not very great, but I know that knights are very, very strong in blitz games. And here the knight on d5 is just going to be super powerful. Well, probably black will have to play knight f6, but here I'm pretty sure that white is doing quite well. And after queen e7, which would be the logical move at the first side, we see that bishop b4 just wins some material. How do you call this in German? It's a Spieß. It's a
exchange.
No. How do you call it?
Skewer.
Skewer, right? Skewer. Yeah, and here white is doing very well too. So c takes b5 is not what Arkady Knightage chose, but instead he chose the funny looking move knight d5. So yeah, the game is becoming totally chaotic at this point. I would really be curious to know if the opponents were still in their preparations or if they played here by themselves. But I'm pretty sure that they were still in their book. I know that Arkady plays the King's Indian from time to time. It's not his main weapon against 1d4, but he does play it sometimes, so he should know some lines. And Georg Meyer, he used to play one knight f3 for a long time earlier, but now he switched to one d4, or at least he plays knight f3 and then he goes to one d4 line, so it should be in his repertoire too. And
well, unfortunately, we don't have the move times on our broadcast due to the nature of this particular live games relay. Ordinarily, we could see exactly how much time they've spent on each move up until this point, but not today.
Yeah, it is a pity, but what can you do? So, knight d5, and the idea is here that after e takes d5, c takes b5, there's no d takes e7, kind of forking. I'm just being totally random with the colors here. Well, let's say red is a threat and green is just a move, and yellow is an idea, and blue I don't even know. So there's no d takes e7 followed up by bishop b4, and this pawn on d5, it's standing in the way a little bit of some of white's pieces. We have seen before this line where the knight was jumping to b4 and then to d5.
Yeah, so it's a very clever little idea from Arkady, taking a knight that's under attack by one pawn and sticking it on a square where it's under attack by another pawn.
Yeah, it especially to less experienced players, a move like that can be easily overlooked because it's totally counterintuitive. But of course, you have to check all kinds of stuff because, I mean, here in this position, there's a lot of pieces hanging, and a lot of pieces might be hanging in the future, and a lot of pieces can be captured. And also not only pieces but also pawns. So you should check all the possible moves from pieces that are actually under attack.
Well, and what's interesting about this position as well is that white doesn't have this intermediate move knight c7 attacking the rook to try to then take advantage of the fact the knight is hanging on d5 because the knight's guarding it.
That's actually the idea of knight d5 and not knight f5, say, for example, or knight g6. The idea is to defend this square on c7, which the white knight would so much love to go. So, since e takes d5 is not really what we want to have as white, Meyer comes up with knight takes b4. Not taking any pieces, just delaying it, and offering black to take either of his knights. So, here the idea is that after knight takes b4, knight c7 follows. And we will come back to this line in a couple of moments. Well, just to be sure, he c takes b5, knight takes d5, clearly is totally in white's favor, even though he's a pawn down at the moment. The pawn is going to be recaptured at some point. There are always motives with queen b3. Both parties actually have this idea of checking the opponent king whenever suitable. But of course, what is very important here, the knight is eyeing to c7 and e7, from where it can jump to other squares. For example, from c7, then it can go to e6, forking queen.
All right, now you're getting a little carried away. That's a bit much. You have to clear those off. No, but the knight does look very dangerous there.
Right.
Sure.
If you just want to take a look at this position, it becomes very obvious that white's pieces are much more active. Also, the rook on c1 is placed perfectly. Actually, the whole purpose of this pawn sacrifice by white was to create some action in the center and on the queen side, so that black will never have any time to play his original plan, which is to play a g4 and then to start attacking on the king side. Because now that the position is open on the king side and on the queen side and in the center, there's never going to be time for that, because white is just much quicker with his counterplay. So, actually, knight played queen b6 check, and after king h1, then he took on b4. Still, of course, c takes b5 is not an option, because knight will take on d5. So, knight takes on b4, and the knight finally gets to c7, attacking the rook. So, rook to b8 is a logical move, and now white, of course, should gain back his piece that he sacrificed. So queen b3 check, as already mentioned. Both these checks are to be checked at any moment.
The checks are to be checked.
Oh, yeah. Do you think I should get a copyright for that quote? It's pretty catchy, isn't it?
Well, here it's of course vital to that, because he needs that in order to be able to grab that knight back.
Well, it's just such a concrete position that you have to check all the concrete moves. You won't check a move like h3 or something. You just check all the moves that have an immediate impact on the position, that change anything. And the check, of course, is very, very forcing. So king h8, and then he just takes back on b4. So now the position has become a little bit calmer, but what we see here is that black is a pawn up, but it's not as easy as it seems. White has quite some avenues for his pieces. He has, well, 3 half-open files he can put his heavy pieces onto. He has a very, very powerful knight on c7, which is controlling many important squares, also threatening to jump to e6 at any convenient moment. Black has problems, just one sentence.
Yeah.
Black has problems to develop his queen side. The knight is blocking the pawn, of course, but the knight is also in the way of the bishop. And as soon as one of these pieces move, then you have to always have an eye on d7.
Right, so, I mean, with the bishop buried on c8 for the moment, and white's bishop's very well posted, it looks like he has more than enough compensation for the pawn.
Yeah. Also, the bishop might be activated via c4, then come to e6. Well, it's basically very, very easy to play for white. And
well, this pawn, the combination of the knight on c7 and the pawn on d6, really cramping black, very annoying. So like we can understand why Knight immediately wanted to try to do something about that and plays here c5.
Right. So he immediately attacks the bishop, and okay, the bishop has to move. It's not possible to take on c5 because after knight takes c5, queen takes b6, the pawn just takes back and defends the knight. Of course, not queen b3 here, because then white is not going to lose any material. But bishop c3 is good enough, since after queen takes d6, even with this pawn gone, probably knight to e6 or knight to b5 is going to follow up, and all white pieces will be coming into play. Well, actually, it's not as trivial as I'm acting, as I'm making it here. But still, knight e6 looks pretty convincing, wouldn't you say? Because I'm attacking the the rook on f8 and also the pawn on g5, and then again from g5 I might be jumping to f7, and of course rook fd1 and bishop c4 moves like that. Just improving the activity of our pieces are very tempting.
Yeah, but maybe black can hang on here, so he decided not to go this way.
It's not that clear though. After rook f6, well, we don't have time for rook fd1 because the knight is hanging here, so we have to take on g5, threatening to play knight f7, probably queen e7, defending the square and also already leaving the d file. And here, well, for sure white has some serious compensation, but it's not like he's clearly totally much better.
Yeah.
He's probably a little bit better, and it's more easier to play for white, but it's not dramatic by any means. So actually, yeah, queen takes d6 would have been quite an alternative.
But black chose to swap queens on b3.
Yeah.
And then he plays a6.
Usually in the King's Indian, it's always in white's favor to exchange queens, because as black was trying to play for a mating attack, and of course it's kind of impossible without a queen. But in this position, it's actually white who's applying some pressure onto black's position, so it might be tempting here to exchange queens just to get rid of some of this pressure.
Yeah.
But here, yeah, the pawn on d6 is still there, and it's not a bad pawn. a6.
Now this next move is a bit puzzling to me. Not a6, but the next one, g3.
Well, a6 maybe also is not the most precise.
Well, he wants to
in
start
hindsight,
pushing.
of course.
Yeah, he wants to start pushing b5.
Yeah. Well, he can play b6 if he wants to fianchetto his bishop, but he always has to expect bishop b5 or knight b5 at some convenient moment. So,
Right.
But still, a6. I don't know. It's I mean, knight b5 or bishop b5. They're not immediate threats, so I'm not quite sure if that is really necessary. On the other hand, it's not so easy to find a sensible move. Try to find a sensible move actually here. It's not that easy.
I mean, presumably he's just trying to get his queenside pawns rolling with a6 and b5, and
maybe that.
You know, try to get some counterplay.
What he should just make sure to develop his pieces. Thing is, let's say, well, what could be a sensible move here? What could be a logical move? Knight can't go to f6 because the e5 pawn would be dropping, but maybe knight to b6. Then again, the pawn on c5 becomes quite vulnerable. Well, rook fd1 looks like a logical continuation. And let's say after bishop d7, we can just remove the bishop and then attack this pawn, and then just win a pawn, and then another pawn will be hanging.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
it's not so easy.
The knight on b6 looks a bit ugly there because it doesn't have any
Yeah.
squares to jump to, and especially now that he has the rook on b8, you know, trying to play a6 and b5 seems kind of natural to me. But
okay, so you're clearly an advocate for a6. So let's play this move then.
But now here, white, you know, again, up until this point, the play has all been on the queen side and in the center, and so here I'm a little bit puzzled by this g3 move.
Yeah, you should be probably. Well, the idea is just to open another front here. White wants to take on f4, and then either way, black is going to recapture. There will be drawbacks. Like for example, well, let's say we just play b5 or something. White will take on f4, and well, if e takes f4, then we can immediately grab an exchange here. That's one of the ideas.
Yeah. Well, we've seen a couple more moves actually. So he did play b5.
Oh.
But then rather than taking on f4, he played rook g1.
So let's try to find out why. Okay, so the second move would be rook takes f4, which comes to mind. Well, probably rook g1, just applying some pressure on the g5 pawn. That looks quite problematic for black. So maybe he would have to take with the g pawn, and then again rook g1 is activating the rook. And then always knight e6 is quite nasty by attacking the bishop. Also, this pawn on e5, well, not so much attacking the bishop, but just taking it under fire. This pawn on e5 becomes a little bit more loose. Also, rook g5 is a very strong idea, attacking not only the h pawn but also the e5 pawn on occasion, and also threatening to double. So, well, actually g3 is quite a clever move, I think. So he played rook g1, and the rook will be placed on g1 quite well.
He actually, I was getting ahead of myself a little bit. He played b5, knight e6.
Knight e6. Well, I guess there's too many good continuations here for white.
You can just click on the board to get it updated.
Do I though?
Yeah, if you double click.
Double click. Ah, okay. That's too far though. So he played b5 and knight to e6. Okay, g takes f4 was quite good. I mean, I don't know why he didn't take there. Maybe he had even bigger things in mind. Also, rook g1 looks like a very dangerous continuation for black. But he played knight e6. Maybe he saw something concrete here. So the idea is just to get rid of this bishop and to make sure that this pawn on e5, a very, very important pawn, of course, will be very weak in the future. So now he played rook g1 and king h6. I'm not quite sure if that was really the most critical continuation of all. I quite like g takes f4. So actually g3 is an interesting idea. So kudos to Georg Meyer. But still, of course, white should be better here. And then again we have the pair of bishops, right? One of our favorite topics.
Well, yeah, yesterday we looked at the game with the bishops in the ending that were giving some advantage, but in the end finishing in a draw. Here we're still in a pretty close position, so you don't really feel the power of the bishops yet.
That's a big difference. The position is really close. But white has other trumps than the two bishops. And even though the position is really closed, it's a position which can open up easily. Of course, after g takes f4, the g file will probably open up. And also these pawns on c5 and e5, if either of them drops, position becomes open too. So white is quite preferable here, I would reckon.
Yeah, he's got to hang on to his d6 pawn. That's the other big trump in the position.
Yeah, it's a real pain in the... it's a pain. d6 pawn is like... I don't want to say it's a nail in the coffin, but it's just a very strong pawn, which black has to watch out for all the time. So g takes f4, of course, would be an option here, after which black will have to choose how to recapture. Probably e takes f4 is a little bit dangerous, because this e4 pawn might become quite strong in the future. Maybe h4 is possible here, just to open up some more lines and diagonals against the black king. So probably g takes f4 will have to happen. Also, this is a nice maneuver, bishop to a5 and to c7, attacking the rook, of course, and defending this pawn on d6. I quite like that. So that would be a possible continuation, and also just h4 here, with the idea then that after g takes h4, we take on f4, and after e takes f4, there's actually bishop g7. Well, there's a lot of good moves here. Even bishop d2 is maybe tempting, but bishop g7, king h7, something like rook g5, threatening to double on the g file and just mating the king actually. Then e5 might be coming, bishop d3. This looks horrible for white. It's pretty resignable, I think. So by all means, black should not take on h4 here, but maybe on g3. If we take on g5, then probably taking is too dangerous, and black should be trying to keep the position as close as possible. But here at least white regained a pawn, and well, it's slightly better for white, but maybe the worst is over for black. No really bad attack which he would have to face, so maybe just rook takes g3, g takes h4, and then bishop d2 and rook g5. This is a paradise for attacking players here for white. So many nice motives.
So Meyer now having a think after king h6 from Neidich, and let's have a switch over to the last game of the round. Well, actually, no, we have two more games of the round to look at. We've got first the Ponomaryov-Kramnik game, both not having great tournaments, but let's take a quick look at that, and also want to remind folks that if you have any questions or comments, to please send those to us via that Twitter hashtag C24Live. And yeah, we have one comment from Anthony Cunningham that Kramnik is worse with another Berlin defense, and well, wondering if maybe he's losing his strength in general, which I think it might be a little premature to say that, but he certainly hasn't had he's had a bit of a rough patch in a couple of recent events. So yeah, who knows?
Has he actually won a game in the Dortmund tournament?
Well, he certainly had a couple of games that he should have won.
But
in
that's not the same. I don't think he won a game.
Let's have a quick look through Kramnik's results. Now, of course, he had a big upset in the first round and he lost.
And after that, he drew away, right?
He had draws with Adams, Baramidze. That was the game where he was 2 pawns up, I think, and should have won.
But then in the end, he was a little bit worse. So
draw with Neidich, draw with Caruana, and a draw with Leko yesterday. So no, he is...
well, when have we witnessed that for the last time? Vladimir Kramnik playing a tournament and not winning a single game.
And he's also, at the moment in the current position, slightly worse here.
Right. And when have we witnessed that for the last time? Vladimir Kramnik getting into trouble in his beloved Berlin defense, which he has popularized in his famous 2000 World Championship match against Kasparov in London. So, curiously, we have the very same line as in Caruana, as in Leko Caruana.
That was yesterday.
No.
No,
today.
2 days ago.
No, today.
Oh, I was thinking of the game that was a Berlin defense we looked at yesterday.
Caruana won against Adams, yes. But he plays d4 at this point, the main line, d4. And then they played this end game. And well, that's probably a textbook game, because it pretty nicely shows what black should be afraid in this line, namely this pawn majority on the king side, which when a lot of pieces exchange then can become very powerful, and at some point black will have no counterplay by creating his own pass pawn, and will be just waiting for white to do it. And yeah, and Caruana won a very, very nice game in this way.
Yeah, and by the way, we have some coverage of that on our news pages. If you go to read news at the top of Chess 24, you can play through yesterday's game with some annotations from Caruana's textbook example, as you said.
Right. So, rook e1, same continuation as in Leko versus Caruana, and after 96, white also took on e5, bishop b7, bishop f1, and here the deviation knight to f5. Of course, short castle is also possible, but knight f5 is just another line. So, different than Leko, I would reckon that Ponomaryov is not playing for a draw. He's not the kind of guy who likes to play for a draw with white, or with black, but especially with white. He just likes to play a game of chess and see what happens. So he retreats the knight, and by retreating the knight, there won't be any minor piece exchanges in the near future. So that is kind of a hint that he's quite in the mood to play. d5, d4, symmetric structure, knight c3. Well, knight c3 is a curious choice, because normally, since black has set up both his knights to pressure the pawn on d4, c3 would be something you would rather expect, but that is kind of a little bit too tame, probably, and knight c3 just develops a piece, exerts some counter pressure on d5, and, well, probably white is just trying to develop his pieces in a natural way. Although I don't see why white should be any better in this position. So bishop b4, that's interesting. The bishop moves a second time in the opening, and
well, I guess he's evidently trying to demonstrate that the knight is misplaced on c3 somehow.
Maybe he felt provoked by this move, but I'm not sure. Although there is a point of playing bishop b4. Well, let's imagine white was to play this kind of clumsy move a3, forcing black to take, which he planned probably anyway. Then say the knight goes to d6. In a perfect world, we would exchange light-squared bishops like this, for example. And then the weakness of the white pawns might tell at some point. Also, the knight from c6 might come to c4, to a perfect square at some point, and it's not quite clear where white's advantage is here in having the dark squared bishop, and what bishop should be good for. So bishop b4, bishop f4 is what happened. Knight c to e7, heading to g6 presumably, a3, and now bishop d6. A lot of unexpected moves here. One would expect that since the bishop has come to b4, he would be planning to take on c3, but for some reason Kramnik changed his mind here, maybe because his knight went to e7 and would be ideally placed in those kind of structures, of course, on a5, where it cannot be kicked away by any of white pawns, let's say b4, and head for c4. So maybe that's the reason why Kramnik chose to play bishop d6 here, although I think it's still pretty sensible to take on c3 and then just to put the knight on g6 and to play this position. There is no good square for the white bishop, for the black squared white bishop, so it looks pretty equal to me. Bishop d6, however, is what happened. Queen d2. Of course, it's always better to let the opponent take instead of you taking the opponent's piece when exchanging a pair of pieces.
And why is that?
Well, it's just like that. I just wanted to say. No, actually it's because, well, imagine I take on d6. Then you can take back with the queen or the knight. Let's say you take back with the queen or maybe the knight. You kind of improve your pieces. Well, it's more clear after queen. It's clearer after queen takes d6. You just develop a piece. But if you take on f4, then you help me to develop a piece.
Yeah, although oftentimes in slightly different positions where white has the bishop on d3 in a lot of openings, challenging black's bishop on f5, you see black having to take on d3 in at least in a lot of lines.
Well, of course, it's just a rule of thumb. There are exceptions, and there are other factors that can play a role in the decision to exchange yourself or to let your opponent exchange. Well, but just as a general rule, most of the time it is better to let your opponent exchange. But yeah, of course, there are positions where it makes sense to take yourself. Like, for example, imagine some kind of position with a fianchettoed bishop on g7 and then also with bishop on f4 and queen on d2, and then we play bishop h6. Most of the times it's kind of risky to take on h6 yourself because you're activating white's queen and then the attack is coming.
Yeah.
But if the queen is fulfilling some defensive tasks on the queen side where white's king might be placed in such a position, then sometimes actually it's a good idea to distract or to move away this queen from all its other tasks and then to gang up on white's king. So
let's go a few moves ahead and explore this exchange of the dark squared bishops idea.
Right.
So we saw c6,
g3, planning to maybe activate the bishop to g2 or h3.
And planning to push his h-pawn. So
yeah, maybe. Who
after
knows?
f6, h4,
F6.
and
Well,
now finally after h4, black does decide to take the bishop on f4. So how is the position changed that justifies him allowing white to develop?
He has
his lead?
used up all of his sensible waiting moves. c6 was a sensible move just to support the pawn on d5. f6 was a sensible move to control the f5 and maybe also the g5 square. Of course, weakening a little bit the e6 square, but with the bishop on c8, that doesn't seem like a big problem. So h4, both sides are playing sensible moves in this position, but here it seems like black is lacking further improving moves. I mean, he could play king h8 or rook e8, queen c7, of course, but okay, I might play knight to e2 here. The knight on c3 was not placed very sensibly anyway, and then try to reroute the knight maybe at some point to e6. Of course, other moves are possible here, but okay, taking on f4 seems to be possible too, because now the queen looks nicely here on f4, but like it just plays knight g6 and the queen is being kicked out back to d2. So, well, queen d6, knight e6, bishop g2. It doesn't seem like black has any problems here. There's nothing he should be afraid of. No scary stuff going on. Maybe h5, h6 might be an idea by white, but that is double-edged, and with the pawn on h6, if black just plays g5, then maybe this pawn might become weak rather than really strong at some point in the future. So bishop f5, b3, another prophylactic move to stop white's knight from coming to c4. And here actually I like black's position a little bit more, because he has nice control over the e4 square, but white doesn't have any really good ways to improve his pieces. His knight on c3 is a little bit clumsy now. e5 is controlled by black's pawn on f6 quite well. Black can play queen d7 and rook a e8, and at some convenient moment in the future just occupy this square on e4, maybe with the knight, or as we will see in the game with the bishop, as after queen d7, rook e3, planning to double the rooks. Here actually white should be quite happy with the draw, but well, which could occur after rook e8 and then rook e1, and all the heavy pieces will exchange in the e file.
But Kramnik was not happy with that possibility, so
all of a sudden Kramnik decided to block this e file once and for all, and to put the knight, the bishop, not the knight, to e4.
So now he's preparing to bring his rook to e8 without allowing a possible rook swap, and of course, if he gives up the bishop, then he's going to replace it with another good piece on e4, the knight on d6.
So if we take, of course, knight takes e4 is a possibility, but after queen d3, nothing bad has happened for white. But maybe he was planning to play d takes e4, after which white's pieces are placed not in the optimal way, because
so he might have to play knight h2.
Knight h2, but where's the knight going from h2 maybe to e3? But that takes 3 moves. maybe to e1, but that takes away an important square for the rooks, and then actually that is the big problem. F5 and then F4 is going to happen.
That's interesting. I didn't immediately consider taking with the pawn, to be honest. But that does look pretty strong now.
And here we see the drawback of playing h4, of course. It also weakens our own king side. So that is the justification of bishop e4, probably. That knight takes e4 unexpectedly turns out to be just really bad. So rook a e1 and now rook a e8.
Black has completed his development now and looks to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, it's black who's playing for something here. F5 would be an idea which would be which should be quite desirable for black, with the idea of playing f4. But if we play, well, say in this position, if we play f5, then h5 is coming, and after the knight moves, knight e5 is possible. However, f4 could mix up the position a little bit, and here, it looks dangerous for white. Well, if you take on g6, I take on e3. If you take on f4, I take on f4. And if you take on e4 with your rook, I just take back with the pawn, and then I attack the knight on f3. So probably after f5, h5 is not the right move after all. On the other hand, f4 is a really strong threat. So what to do? Maybe knight to e5 immediately, and then after the exchange, just take back with the pawn. And well, if the knight moves now, then f3 is going to win a piece. Well, not a piece. Well, let's just see. Knight to f7. If f3, then maybe f4 is... No, f4 is not possible because I can just take with the rook and the pawn is pinned. It's getting tactical. Who would have expected a tactical game out of this boring symmetrical opening?
Well, so you think f5 might have been an improvement over rook e8?
Well, I don't know. Probably not, actually, because after knight e5 takes, maybe bishop takes g2 is just a good way.
Well, at any rate, in the game, Kramnik played rook e8, and Ponomarev...
Rook e8 is fine. I like rook e8.
Trying to reorganize his pieces a little bit, plays rook e2, rook 3 e2.
Right, so now f5 is threatening, let's say after some move like nothing. f5 might be well possible because the rook is now controlling the e5 square, although it's not that simple yet, but it always makes sense just to bring the last piece into the battle if you don't have any concrete means to improve your position. So white chose to play rook 3 e2. h5 might have been tempting too, but as I mentioned, this pawn might be weak in some lines on h5. Like, for example, the knight goes away, maybe even to h8 and then to f7, and then the queen comes to g4 and attacks this pawn. So rook 3 e2, knight to e7, deliberately rerouting the knight, takes on e4, d takes e4. As we have suspected, Kramnik's plan was to take back with the pawn. Now knight h2.
Pushes the knight to this slightly awkward square.
And then f5.
So it's a little bit similar to some of the lines we looked at in the other variation.
Yeah, but this is a better version for white, it seems. Well, now finally we don't have the symmetrical structure anymore. Now we have 4 against 3 on both wings. Well, of course, once on the queen side it's 4 white pawns against 3 black pawns, and on the king side it's the other way around. And both players will try to mobilize their pawn majority here in one way or the other. And here at least everything is imaginable, all kinds of outcomes.
So at least now f4 is not so much of a threat with the rook back on e2. So he goes ahead and just plays c4 to try to get his own pawn majority rolling.
Yes, that looks very logical. So f4, we would just take on e4 now. It's
Yeah, the knight having dropped back to e7, blocking the e file as well.
Yeah, and the knight on h2, if push comes to shove, the knight will be protecting the king quite well. As we all know, the knight is the king's best friend. Did you know that?
I know knight on f8 can't be mate, but I didn't hear of the king's best friend, actually.
Interesting. Knight on f8 can't be made.
So the dog is man's best friend and the knight is the king's best friend?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the way it put it. The thing is that the knight controls a lot of squares around the king, wherever it was placed, on f8 or h2 or somewhere there. So it's always quite a good defender in many, many positions. Of course.
Well, from h2, of course, it can go to f1, which is like knight on f1 can't be made either, I guess.
Maybe that's why I'm so optimistic with White's defensive.
And then in the future coming to e3. So this knight a little bit out of play for the moment, but not for too long.
So here I would think that it's kind of dynamically balanced.
Yeah.
It's an equal position, but everything can still happen. So let's go on. We're being really slow. Just the third game we're covering yet. So rook d8 makes sense to put the rook on the d file here, where there's probably going to be more action on the e file, and f3. Of course, it's not the only option to play on the side where you have your majority, but you can also try to lever and to play against the pawns on the flank where you actually have less pawns than your opponent. And so is f3 a way to try to improve your pieces. And well, e takes f3 obviously doesn't work due to rook takes e7, but even if it did, knight takes f3 and knight to e5 in the future would be quite nice. Of course, here knight e4 is possible, but well, just in this position, all White's pieces suddenly start to work together and to harmonize in a very nice manner. So, yeah, what?
Yeah, I mean, now after f3, he can't take and he can't push, so he's threatening to take. White is threatening to take himself on e4.
Yeah, he does. Well, let's say king h8, something like this. I'm just inserting some random move here. And then after an exchange, it's not that simple yet, because black has this move knight to f5, counterattacking on g3 and on d4. And we see that White's position is pretty loose, with the pawns being advanced to the 4th rank and to the 3rd rank on the whole board, while Black's pawns are almost all on the 7th rank still. Black's king is really safe, White's king is not so safe, so there is some counterplay here. That is a line that White should not be heading for.
Could there be some tactical ideas there with queen g5 and then threatening rook e7 if the knight moves?
Where?
In the line you just showed.
King h8, then take, and here you want to play queen g5.
Well, it's just a punt, because it guards the g3 pawn, and if knight takes on d4, then rook e7 looks pretty devastating.
Yeah, maybe it's just the best move. So queen d6 maybe attacking this pawn on g3 and just going out of this rook e7 threat prophylactically and then threatening to take. Well, it's not like White is losing here, but I mean, when you calculate such a line in a practical game, you just see knight f5 and then you see, no, I don't want that.
Not the best that White can hope for here. Okay, so how did he follow it up then?
Instead of king h8, he played queen c7. He doesn't play any games here. It's just after it takes, well, just take back with the pawn, and then we see that after bishop takes, knight takes, rook takes, of course there's immediately queen takes g3, and White is in dire straits. So taking would be too early. He plays, Ponomaryov plays queen c3, defending this pawn on g3 in a way, and then rook d7. Now the time has come to actually take on e4, which basically was White's plan when he played f3. Exchange on e4, take, Rook takes e4, knight f5. And now black is hoping for some counterplay, but after king g2, it seems like white has defended all his weaknesses and is a pawn up. Of course, it's not so easy because there are still some targets for black's pieces, but a pawn is a pawn. And after queen d6, which happened in the game, c5, that is the current, no, it's not the current position.
Yeah, the moves are coming in a bit faster now. c5 looks, again, at first glance, not thinking in concrete terms, but it looks counterintuitive because you're making this d-pawn backward, and it's going to be very difficult to play d5. But I guess that he just didn't want to have the queen on the d6 square.
Well, yeah, it's always, in those kinds of positions, you always have to check all the factors that are in play. So the queen on d6 is attacking, or at least eyeing, the pawn on g3, the pawn on d4, and not to forget, maybe in some lines, even the pawn on a3. So c5 just wins a tempo, blocks his diagonal, and the thing is that after queen d5, white might just play knight f3, and then in the next move, maybe we'll just play rook e5.
Or knight e5.
Or knight e5, or even queen c4 and exchange queens. So this logical looking move, queen d5 after knight f3, actually gives white a clear advantage. Well, let's just see, just real quick, king h8, and then, yeah, something like maybe rook e5 or queen c4, just pushing white's pieces back, black's pieces back. Or maybe queen c4, and white is better.
So maybe for this reason he decided to play queen g6.
Yeah.
Still eyeing up this g3 pawn, so white decides to counter that with rook g4.
Makes sense. Queen to h6. We're just trying to set up some threats, but of course white is still able to parry them. Knight f3. Interesting. Well, e3 is not a threat yet, so just improve the knight. And now knight to e7.
And here's another reason maybe why I didn't want the queen on d5, because he'd much rather have the knight on d5 if possible.
But the thing is, from f5 there are some dynamic possibilities for black. He is attacking this pawn and also looking at white's kingside pawn chain, but once the knight comes to d5, of course it looks nice and it blockades the pawn, but there is no counterplay, and then white has all the time in the world to improve his position, and after all he is a pawn up. So it looks like white is definitely doing better here. So rook, knight to g5, queen g6, and queen e3, and that now is the current position.
Right? They played a couple more moves.
Not quite. I don't know if that was the perfect way to play. Probably there's a better way. Maybe actually this diagonal is not unimportant. So maybe it would have been a good idea to put white's queen, which is not doing that much, on c3, just on c2 or maybe even d3 on this diagonal, and then follow up with knight g5 and maybe then rook e6, toying with ideas of queen takes h7 mate from time to time. So knight g5, queen g6, and queen e3. Of course, the opponents are approaching time control, so the quality of their moves naturally decreases a little bit since they have to play quite quickly now. And after queen e3, knight d5, of course, logical move. Queen e4, even queen e6 check, forcing the exchange of queens was quite good, I think. But okay, queen e4. The knight is not striving for e6, but for e4 and d6 instead. That makes sense.
So for that reason, black decided not to exchange and plays queen h6. and that's the position where we have it now.
Okay.
Let's jump back to our Meyer-Neidich game, the King's Indian, because there have been quite a lot of moves there, and then we'll take a quick break and then come back and have a look at Adams and Baramidze.
Right. So where have we left off? Yeah, he played h4. That was one of the moves we advocated. h4, g4. That was not one of the moves we advocated. But interesting. What's happening here? I don't know. Just take it. Also would have been possible to take on f4 probably. The idea is to get some counterplay against the e4 pawn, maybe even by playing bishop b7 here. Well, that's a very complicated position. So Meyer starts off with f takes g4, and then after a takes g4, he would just take this pawn. There's no bishop b7 due to bishop takes g7, d7, so bishop b7 immediately. Okay, g5 check, king g6, and bishop f3. Well, white won a pawn back, surprisingly with his king side maneuver of playing g3 and then scaring black into sacrificing back a pawn with all the active ideas that white had.
On the plus side now, the position will remain closed compared to the other lines, so it's not as much of an advantage for white to have the bishop pair.
Right, so f takes g3, king to g2. Interesting. He wants to recapture with the king. It doesn't make sense because the rook on g3 is not doing that much, and the king on g3 is quite well placed. So king g2, b4, bishop to e1. Why not immediately bishop e1 then? Or maybe b4 is a somewhat weakening move, giving white the square on c4. So a5, king takes g3.
Now he had the option of taking with the bishop.
Yeah, but well, if we just have a chat with the bishop and ask the bishop where it is preferably going to go in the future, I don't know if g3 is going to be the answer, because e5 is defended quite well, and maybe the bishop would be going to f2 instead, and then maybe double on the c file.
Yeah, well, anyway, he takes with the king, and now black realizes that he's got to try to make something happen on the queen side and pushes a4.
Quite strong. Quite a strong idea, and well played by Arkady Neidich, defending this difficult position, because now he really gets some counter chances. Let's say, well, white took actually on a4, and now rook a8 is possible, knight to b6 at some point might be possible.
And if he can get in c4, then these pawns are starting to look very dangerous.
And suddenly white's bishops are not doing too much.
Yeah.
That f3 bishop would love to be activated on this diagonal or on this diagonal, or maybe to go to c4, but it's quite concrete, this position, and it doesn't seem like white has the time to do so. And bishop a6 is what Arkady played here. I don't know why he didn't play rook a8. Looks logical. Rook a1 and maybe even rook e6 to attack this d6 pawn, or bishop c6. White has to take care of all his weak pawns in this position, and the king is blocking this this pass pawn on g5.
So perhaps white needs to actually go on the offensive with bishop f2 or something, if rook a8, go after the c pawn directly.
Yeah, that looks like probably it's going to simplify quite soon and then end in a draw. Let's say when we take here on a4, take on c5. Now there are ideas with rook a3, rook f8 maybe. It is not so pleasant for white. It used to be much better.
Yeah, so this would be one alternative. Instead, he wants to try to get the c-pawn rolling, so he plays bishop a6. But then white drops the bishop back to g2, heading for h3.
Yeah, very brave decision by Arkady. Probably trying to go for a win here with black. Bishop.
Well, we mentioned if he did win, he could grab a sole possession of second place.
So maybe this is his motivation. And also you should just try to win every single game that you play. So bishop g2 and c4. Now maybe it might be tilting towards white again.
So bishop h3 coming with tempo, hitting the knight on d7.
Bishop f1 looks like an idea too, because the pawn can't move due to the pin. And once rook c8, well, rook bc8 doesn't work because b4 is also to be protected, and after rook fc8, bishop h3 is even stronger, pinning this knight. But after bishop f1, maybe there are some tricks with b3, and you can't really take because of b2, even rook ec8. So white decides to play bishop h3, not only threatening this knight, but also threatening to play bishop f5 and to harass this black's king on g6.
But knight c5 has some threats of its own.
Yeah, moving the knight and attacking this pawn. Now,
so he seems to have to
bishop f5 is a sensible move.
Defend the pawn with check.
King g7, now d7.
Very interesting.
Rook ed8, and now they made it to the time control. And another move was played, king to f3, defending this pawn on e4 another time, maybe trying to go to e3, clearing the way for the rook. Maybe the g-file will come in handy later on when white would be able to push the g-pawn.
So now I guess there's a tactical reason why he can't take on a4 because of rook a1. And then if knight c5, then bishop f2. Is that the idea?
Maybe. There's knight c5, there's bishop b5, also looks quite strong. Also there is bishop g3 ideas, and there's no good way to defend this pawn.
Right, so he just doesn't have time to grab the a-pawn yet.
Yeah, it's not important pawn. It's just there. It's not going to decide the game in the short term, because either black will be able to push his pawns, or white will be able to activate his bishops and create some heavy threats against black's king, and also use his pass pawn finally as a trump, and maybe even promote it at some point. So after king f3, it's Arkady to move, and we will see how this game continues in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so this is where we will leave it for a few minutes and take a brief break, and when we come back, I will be replaced by Grandmaster Jan Gustafsson, who has arrived, and so I will sign off. But before I do, I just want to mention also that in the break we'll have a quick clip from the aforementioned Robin van Kampen and his King's Indian series in honor of Arkady Naidich's essaying the King's Indian himself here today. So, I'm Macaulay Peterson. Thanks very much for staying with us. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with Ilya Zaragatsky and Jan Gustafsson very shortly.
Right, so stay tuned. Maybe play a couple of games in our play zone, and see you in a bit.
Ciao.
Hi, and welcome back everyone to our live commentary of the Dortmund chess tournament, where we are looking at the last round today. Macaulay Peterson has been substituted by one of Germany's strongest grandmasters, Grandmaster Jan Gustafsson, who seems to have found the way to our studio back from Baden-Baden, where you have played a simul, which turned out to take a little longer. Were you trying to do a Guinness World Record or something, or what's the story behind your late appearance?
I blame the German transport system, the Deutsche Bahn. The train I was supposed to take early in the morning was not there for whatever reason, and made it less of a fun trip for me, because I didn't have a reservation for the train after, and as you can imagine, with one train not going, was quite crowded and quite warm in tropical Germany. So I'm very happy we don't have smell transmitting broadcasts yet, because you guys wouldn't enjoy it. Ilya's used to it, so he's gonna be alright.
I'm not enjoying it either, but...
But I've been having a brief look at the games. There's quite some action still, yeah? Our friend David Baramitse, I think he just lost his game to Michael Adams after knight f5 check. He had to resign.
So unfortunately here the action is over, but as it turns out we have not mentioned this game at all. So let's take a quick tour through this game and maybe you will come up with some brilliant commentaries as always. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, another Ruy Lopez. But here, surprisingly, very surprisingly, not a knight f6, but a6, the old main move.
Well, David has never been a Berlin guy. He sticks to his system, the Breyer, which he's played a bit.
Which we will see in a couple of moves. The Breyer system, well, first of all, it's the very main line of the Ruy Lopez. Black is not even trying to scare white by playing short castle here, after which, after c5 there is this move d5. One of your pet openings, if I'm not mistaken, the Marshall Gambit.
Yeah, well, they never allow it nowadays. And David
He's not
has
the
never
guy.
been
He's
a
not the
big
guy.
theoretician,
Yeah.
no offense, but he likes setups more than concrete lines, so it's not
Yes.
his style.
So he plays d6, c3, short castle h3. This is the one of the main Tobias in this line. And here, of course, knight a5 is the main move, after which white plays bishop c2. And
In what
c5.
world is knight a5 the main move here?
In all worlds.
No.
In our world. It's the old classical main move.
This
but
is called the Chigurim, which is not seen much nowadays anymore, because everybody plays the Breyer, knight b8.
Well, but just check the database, it's by far the main move. So, well, the point is that after, in this position, when white plays d5, and I have explained, or tried to explain that yesterday, because there was a game between Naidic and Ponomaryov yesterday with this very same line. The knight turns out to be in some trouble here on a5. It's not so easy to reactivate the knight, because after d5 the square on c6 is taken away by the pawn, and even when the knight goes back to b7, white oftentimes follows up with b4 and takes away two more important squares of the knight, and then it's not easy to bring it back into the game. So sometimes Black chooses to play knight to b8, as counterintuitive as that might look. The knight is rerouted to d7, and then Black can still set up his pieces in a harmonious way, and it turns out in this very position it's not such a bad thing to have lost two tempi, because it's kind of closed. So here bishop c2, the idea is to free the knight from defending the pawn, maneuver it to g3 later on. Rook e8, knight f1, bishop f8, knight g3, g6. Take
For those of you who have watched yesterday's broadcast, like I of course have, we can see that after rook e8 there is the first deviation, because yesterday a4 has been played in this position, bishop f8, bishop d3 and c6, which nowadays is a bit more trendy of a line than the one Adams chose. But it's good to have variety, so Ilya doesn't have to hold the same speech every day, but you can explain us knight f1 today.
Right. So, knight f1, as I have already mentioned, the idea is to put the knight to g3. In some lines, the knight also goes to e3. Here, of course, it's not that easy, because the pawn on e4 would be hanging. Also, sometimes it takes the option of going to h2 and then to g4 later
Well,
on.
it goes to g3 pretty much every time next move, but
You're
I'll
having
stop
fun refuting
trolling the show
all-
in a second.
Right. So, knight f1, bishop f8, knight g3.
Oh,
What now?
g6,
g6, yeah.
a4, the old classical mainline.
So-
b3 has recently gained a bit of popularity. here.
G6 not only takes away the f5 square from the knight, also in some lines it's quite feasible to fianchetto the bishop to g7. So a4, c5. I don't know the concrete theory here. Looks pretty normal stuff here. d5, one of the topical reactions after c5. c4, trying to make space for the knight to come to c5. Actually, I have seen that. Bishop g5, h6, bishop e3, and then this knight on c5 is just going to be exchanged. What do you think about this? Don't you love the bishop pair?
Well, opposite to you, I actually do know the concrete theory here. So this
is why you're here, actually. This is why the coach substituted you for Macaulay. Right. Although I'm pretty sure Macaulay should know this line too.
I think he does. Still, this queen d2 h5 is pretty much standard stuff, has been seen many, many times. And this idea of bishop takes c5, positionally it's kind of double-edged, and it hasn't been played very much for a long time. But it got popular somewhere around 10 years ago with the slightly counterintuitive plan to open up the queen side now, where black has a pawn majority. And that explains Adam's next move, rook eb1. He's intending to go b3 and open up the position here, as long as the black bishop is still a bit passive on b7. Of course, in return for his lovely bishop, he did get a passed pawn on d5, which normally wouldn't be enough compensation if black were able to consolidate. But this concrete idea of b3 is quite interesting and has been tried quite a bit. There have been theory articles on it, and I think black is supposed to be alright here, but it's by no means straightforward.
It is quite an interesting position, because it's not quite clear if this bishop on f8 is actually a good or a bad piece. If it has to remain passive on d6, say, it's rather a bad piece, and imagine all the other pieces being exchanged, those two bishops on c2 and b7 and one pair of knights, then there's going to be a good knight versus a bad bishop. On the other hand, sometimes maybe black might play king h7, bishop h6, something like that, and activate the bishop on the dark squares, and then since there's no adversary, black will have the upper hand on the dark squares. But funny enough, it's on the queen side where white is trying to set up his counterplay, where he's actually a pawn down. We have spoken a little bit about minorities and majorities, and here it's kind of some kind of minority attack, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still... I'm not sure if it's a minority or majority attack. Probably it's more of a minority attack because we have less pawns there, but it's just concrete, as things tend to be nowadays. White opens a position, tries to make b5 a weakness. And while I do enjoy this game, is it possible to jump to Meyer Knightage for a second, where we have a lot of action?
No.
It's not possible? Okay, then no. b3, knight b6 has been played.
So let's jump to Meyer Knightage after all. I figured I might take revenge and troll you back. So that's the position we left off. King f3 was the last move.
Very sharp. I have no idea what's going on.
That used to be a King's Indian. Then Meyer seems to have out-prepared his opponent Arkady Knightage. At some point had a very pleasant position, but then gave a little bit of his advantage back away to Arkady, and now he's back on the track, but in the meantime it used to be kind of balanced. Just a quick summarization of what happened.
It's a total mess, right? Arkady has two passed pawns.
But Arkady loves total messes. Not that he himself is a total mess, but he loves total messes.
I don't know. I think he's a very good classical player as well. I'm not sure.
Maybe he's just really, really versatile. But I'm pretty sure that Georg Meyer rather likes straightforward, positional, strategic kind of games.
Yeah, let's see what happened. Knight d3,
so knight d3
g3, good move.
Looks logical, but white doesn't take care of his rook. He just counterattacks the pawn on e5. So no point of taking on c1 now. Rook b7, a little prophylactic move. Also maybe toying with the idea of giving away an exchange on d7.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's likely to happen. He played rook gd1. Not worried about knight takes c1, because then bishop takes e5 would probably just be crushing. But I would expect black to take on d7 here.
Check, and then maybe even, well, just find a square, maybe even bishop f6 or just take back, or maybe even g6 here. What's going on?
It's
Actually,
game over. G6.
there's no good squares. Now we can see the power of the two bishops in all their majesty. Bishop f4.
That's a cute
It's-
move.
that's
Bishop
crazy.
G5. Yeah,
And
that's just
yeah, and here in this kind of open positions, those bishops are just killing it. While being a rook down, white is dominating.
Yeah, so
So-
you can't take on C1, but I would expect him to take on D7. I was
Yeah.
curious about that position.
So take, and now white doesn't exchange up. Has one pawn for it, but these pawns are really kind of scary.
Right. Very, very
Everything can
unclear.
happen here. Well,
King E3 looks like a normal move to bring the king a bit closer to the action to avoid
maybe
any knight check.
activate the rook via the f file. There's
Yeah.
really not so much active stuff that white can do here.
No, I would choose black in a practical
Really?
game. C3 and B3 is very quick. Can't I go C3 already? Not easy for white at all to untangle here.
There is an
Might
idea
still
to
be
play maybe even bishop e1 and then just sacrifice the bishop away on c3.
Yeah, I think you might have to look into
But this is a
something
very,
like
very complicated position and will take some time for both players to figure out what actually is going on here.
that. Something like this, possibly ending peacefully, could happen, but we're
Yeah.
jumping ahead of ourselves. I think
Why would this be peaceful? I can just take on d3, claim an extra pawn. Don't you think that's enough?
No, I think it's a draw. How do you take rook takes, let's say?
Doesn't matter.
Rook a1, rook h1. Draw,
Rook d5.
draw, draw, draw.
Yeah, probably a draw.
It's a draw.
Okay, so maybe that is what will happen. Maybe not.
Unlikely we made like 15 random moves, but it's certainly a sharp position, and I'm curious. But I would expect knight to take on d7 here. That pawn is quite a nuisance.
Yeah, there's hardly any sensible alternatives.
Right.
Because
Okay.
also we're just threatening to take on d3 and then to take on e5 and then everything.
Absolutely.
Okay,
So, yeah, unclear. Rook b takes d7 is what he's going to do.
let's check Ruslan versus Vladimir.
You're very good at pronouncing these Russian names.
Yeah, especially Ruslan. What's his last name, though?
Ponomayov.
Oh,
It is.
it's similar to that.
What's happening with Kramnik? He just blundered a pawn somewhere. Looked like he had a good position out of the opening, and then it all went downhill somehow, right?
Yeah, he was very, very comfortable, maybe slightly better even, and then at some point, maybe he was not satisfied with the draw and was hoping for some counterplay, and he just didn't get enough of it and ended up being a pawn down. Here, he is just a pawn down. So after time control, what happened was... Oh, no, wait, actually we stopped before time control. So... Queen h6, this is where we stopped, and here black's position looks really promising. White's position, of course, looks very promising.
Yeah, just a pawn up with a better position.
Yeah, all the pieces are sensibly placed, exerting pressure onto black's position. Knight f6 is not even a threat because of queen e6 check. So actually, how to continue?
You just try as white.
Yeah.
I like what he did. Queen e2, rook back to e4.
Yeah, rook to e4, that seems to be a sensible idea. The rook on g4 is not doing that much, so let's go and claim the e-file. Maybe queen d3 or queen c2 is a little more to the point, still keeping an eye on h7 and tying black's queen to defense.
Could be, yeah.
So queen e2, queen f6, now this move is possible. Maybe a little bit some kind of counterplay along the f-file, or at least some ideas. Rook e4, h6, knight e6, rook f7, knight f4. And Vladimir Kramnik refused to exchange knights here and just moved away the knight. Why doesn't he take?
That's very unpleasant to defend.
It is unpleasant, yeah.
I'm not sure about the rook ending, but even just rook e4 back, the black king is a bit weak because he's missing the f pawn. And I think it's probably losing, so Kramnik decides he has bad chances with the knights on the board, but of course, if white really wants them off, he can always go knight e6 at some point and try to force them away. Queen e3, bit of a random move, just asking black, what do you want to do?
Yeah, just keeping the position under control, improving
D4.
very slowly. Maybe b4, a4, b5 in a funny yellow color here might be a plan.
Yeah,
If you
rook
have-
to e5.
Or just work, yeah, try to improve along the e-file. Maybe just rook to e5, queen to a4. Just little teeny tiny baby steps, improve the position. Maybe at some point then push d5 and have a nice little pawn majority on the queen side.
I like
So-
what you did with the arrows there, just advance everything one square is his plan, if I understand that correctly.
It's very aesthetic. So
No, still.
quite good winning chances actually for Panarov. And,
Yeah, I think it's probably winning.
well, Vladimir Kramnik is not going to win this game anyway, and he will end up in this tournament without having won a single game. Although Kramnik used to be one of the Dortmund experts, having won this tournament like what 7, 8 times,
Yeah, 10.
10 almost.
No, exactly 10.
Yeah. So that is quite a surprise. What's going on with Kramnik? Do we have to be worried about his shape, and is it going straight downhill for him? There has been a question in the Twitter sphere if Kramnik has just passed his best times.
Well, he hasn't looked great in this tournament, but I think it's a bit early to start this kind of speculation because Kramnik, he can't bring it in every tournament, but he's been focusing on the main events, and also in 2013 he had a couple of terrible tournaments. I think this Paris tournament he finished last, but he still did manage to win the World Cup and be his usual self for a couple tournaments. I think he's just choosing his spots a bit more carefully. What probably did shake him up a bit was the candidates, where I'm sure he was planning to qualify for the World Championship match, and since he hasn't, and another guy we've been writing off, Vichy, actually has, it could be that he lost a bit of motivation and that's why he's not being his usual self in this Dortmund tournament. I'm not sure it's an age thing. You don't forget to play chess, how to play chess within a couple months, so I think that's unlikely. Lawrence has pointed out that Kramnik looked a bit heavier than we're accustomed to him seeing, so maybe
that would be a factor.
after the candidates he gave up on his normally very diligent workout and training routine and chilled a little bit. Of course you still have obligations like to play this tournament, but I think it's too early to count him out of the action.
So we are curious how Vladimir Kramnik's career will continue. Speaking about Lawrence, Lawrence is not here with us today because he's playing the St. Pauli Open, and he managed to win the first round, so it is a good excuse.
He won the first round in an Open.
Yes, that is quite
Congratulations, Mr. Trent, who is fighting for his final GM norm, which is a bit unlikely he's going to score it in the St. Pauli Open,
not
but
there.
who knows? We'll be rooting for him, or pretending to root for him.
He's putting big hopes on scoring a GM norm in the upcoming Bundesliga season, where he will be starting for my club, SF Katernberg, and will be trying to achieve a GM result, finally getting his last norm and becoming a grandmaster. Oh, he still has to...
That's what you want in team competitions, guys chasing their own
Exactly.
individual goals.
This is why we employed him.
Excellent choice,
Yeah,
but I'm
And-
sure he will be back with us one day.
one day. Right. Right now, however, you are fed up with me, and
Who said I'm fed up with you?
I didn't talk to you. I talked to the audience.
Oh yeah, they probably are.
They should be. So let's still try to.
You can continue your survey of the Adams Baramitsa game. I rudely interrupted it.
Oh, it was not finished where we stopped, right? Oh, actually, it was far from finished. So we anticipated white to play on the queen side, just because there are more targets on in black's camp than in white's camp, pawn-wise, which one could attack. So b3, knight b6 is what happened. Queen e2, prophylactically already going out of the way once the knight appears on c4. Takes on b3, takes on b3, and well, it's not so easy actually for black to defend all those pawns.
No, I'm not sure about this knight b6 move. Feels a little bit like something could have gone wrong here already. I think you want to take on b3 immediately and then play c4 and keep that c5 square for the knight if possible at all.
Yeah. c5 looks like a decent square for the knight. Also, in a perfect world, the knight would be a good blockading piece on d6, but I doubt that black will have time for that in this very position. So knight b6, yeah, maybe he should have taken on b3 and played c4. And then also maybe make use of this diagonal.
Yeah, there's some tricks. Maybe he was afraid of bishop takes c4 after c4, but then I think b takes c, rook takes b7, knight c5. There's a cute little fork on b3 coming, so no reason to worry about that.
Maybe he missed that. That is possible.
Possibly.
Although he's strong enough to see that. So bishop c2, maybe just queen b6, then bishop c5. And it looks okay for black.
Yeah, this looks very familiar. I think something like this has been played, and well, both sides have their ideas, but yeah, I don't like this knight b6 move all that much.
So maybe that's where it started to go downhill. Queen e2, very clever move. Takes on b3, takes, now c4, but now the knight on b6 really doesn't make that much sense. Actually, it's more of a target, because now along the b file there is quite some pressure going on, with two pieces being placed on b6 and b7. So bishop c8, he removes one of the pieces, but white just takes on b5. So what's the point actually? Just
No,
giving
this
up
is
the pawn.
already basically game over.
Yeah, it's just a pawn down.
Yeah, no, I think this knight b6 was a serious
Yeah.
mistake.
Serious even.
And here, okay, it's not that easy. Black at the moment blocks white's pawns well, and he has his own passes, but c4 and a5 are weak. And yeah, I think this is already almost decided. White has a very simple plan of going knight d2, knight f1, knight e3, and either taking the c4 pawn or
Yeah, just
forcing.
ganging up with all
more
pieces on this
concessions.
pawn. Even queen f1, bishop e2 is possible, if necessary. Rook ec8, queen f3. Now just converting the advantage. Actually, yeah, doesn't look like
No, this
there's
is
nothing
game over.
black
Now
can
there's
do.
2 pawns.
There is some hope for black to get some counterplay along the dark squares with his dark squared bishop, but of course, on this kind of a level, it's not enough to hold the game. So b6, there's a dangerous passer. Now bishop d3, rook ac5. Well, basically it's a matter of technique now, right?
What does that mean, a matter of technique? I never understood that
Well,
term.
it's just a nice phrase to throw out there. It's just
I thought it was
sounds
just a
very-
phrase, because it basically just means you have to keep playing well, even when you know you're winning. But it confused me a lot as a kid, because I always say it's a matter of technique, and where do I learn the technique? It seems to be that you need a lot of different techniques in a lot of different positions. So,
No, technique is basically just not blundering anything and keep making sensible moves once you have a decisive advantage.
but then every chess position is a matter of technique, right?
No,
Because
if you-
normally it's a good idea not to blunder anything and make sensible
yeah,
moves.
but if you have a winning position and you don't blunder stuff, then you end up winning the position sooner or later. Winning the game, actually, not only the position.
Not sure that's true. Sometimes if you have a winning position, you need to do something
You
very
need to do.
concrete.
You always need to do something, but just don't blunder anything. Just don't any counter chances.
Yeah. I don't think he blundered
but-
anything. Nice little intermediate move. B7, rook B8. Oh, sorry. Rook A4. It's Just game over. Not a good game by Baramitse. He wasn't familiar with this bishop takes c5 idea and went downhill without much of a fight, really.
I don't think he wasn't familiar with it, but maybe not familiar enough. Anyway, so here white is just 2 pawns up, and of course not much hope anymore. And the game ended with a nice little tactical trick, which you would like to explain?
Yeah, knight f5 check. If g takes f5, queen takes h5, and there is a strong... No, queen h5. Queen h5! Stop blundering my pieces. It's a matter of technique.
Right, that is not what you want.
No.
Although it's also an interesting position. But
Yeah, I don't think he resigned because of this.
no. But actually the idea is just queen takes
h5.
h5.
And queen h8, rook g8 mate is a pretty strong threat.
And there's not so much black can do about it.
Nothing
He
at
cannot-
all.
Can we play something like bishop
Queen g5 check.
g5? Yeah.
Bishop d8, just rook
Bishop
takes
d8,
b7
rook
and
takes b7.
rook takes d8.
So, as ever so often, white ends the game in which he has been strategically and positionally superior the whole time with a nice tactical blow.
Right. Just for completeness sake, after knight f5 check, black could go king h7, but then white just cashes in with rook b7, queen b7, queen takes c3, queen takes a8, knight takes e7. Of course, this position does not warrant continuing. So not a great tournament for Baramitse, 2 out of 7. Better than some other people, without wanting to mention names. Did score in Dortmund in some of their outings, but nothing spectacular. He lost his first 2 games, then stabilized, had 4 draws in a row, now lost his last one. But I think it's good practice for him, his first super tournament, especially with regards to the upcoming Olympiad. Opponents won't be as strong there. And for me, after playing a horrible Dortmund, it felt like a huge relief to be on a lower board in the Olympiad, and I had a great Olympiad after that, because you really think, okay, these guys are a little less trouble than these Dortmund guys. Let's see how the other Germans are doing. They're still discussing this position, and they did play the line we thought they might. Rook takes d7, bishop takes, rook takes, king to e3, and king to g6. Knight did not want to push his pawns with c3 yet, maybe because of this bishop e1, bishop takes c3 idea. Just played king g6, getting out of any bishop e5 checks. Still very, very unclear, and even though white has a material advantage with these very strong pawns on c4, b4, I still feel like I'd rather be black, and I think white has to look for ways to simplify with a timely, I don't know, bishop e1, bishop takes b4, rook b1, threatening rook takes b4. He has to find a way to get rid of all these enemy pieces.
Actually, right now, I'm becoming aware of the fact that I said black has 1 pawn for the exchange, but in fact he doesn't. There is not even a pawn he has for the exchange.
but it
His
feels
whole
like his-
compensation is totally depending on his past pawns. But
Right.
that seems to be enough.
I think it is.
Bishop e1, and as it turns out, there's only one good move here for black, since bishop b4 is is threatening. You have to defend your rook like that.
Yeah, and I
Rook
was curious
d4.
about bishop takes b4 here as an attempt to bail out. If knight takes b4, rook d4, I think white might be better, if not winning. Takes, king takes, and as it often happens, sometimes a rook can be as strong or stronger than bishop and knight. Here with the 2 passed pawns or 3 passed pawns, I think white is probably winning, king c3.
The 2 minor pieces don't coordinate, they don't harmonize here. There's no nice squares for the pieces, they will be hanging in the air a little bit, and the rook, being a very strong piece in these kind of positions, is probably going to obtain the upper hand. So, what else then?
Now after bishop b4, black would have to go knight takes c1,
Right.
which is probably close to a draw. Rook takes c1 and bishop b7, winning back the pawn on e4 should be drawish. I'm not sure if white has to do that, but I feel like if I was white, I'd get nervous and look for a way to bail out. This could be one potential way to do it, bishop e1, and then just take on b4, more or
What
less
else are
forcing
you
a
gonna
draw.
do? Maybe
Well, rook
put the
b1
move
could be a move,
to
also
rook to
threatening.
b1.
Rook takes b4.
Here maybe c3.
Yeah, and then rook takes b4.
So if I just play c2,
And
Ah,
then just
yeah,
a little
check.
intermediate check.
somewhere,
And just rook somewhere, a1.
maybe on some light square, so there's no checks with the bishop.
Yeah,
Just
say
go
rook
away,
a1.
yeah? Yeah, that
Well,
looks
very
quite good
messy,
for
but here it
white.
looks like white will be in time. Bishop c4, rook c6.
So not c3 probably, or not c2 at least here. What are you gonna
Magic.
do? No way to defend
Yeah,
this.
this could be a good move.
Oh, you're gonna have to spit out a rook on c1. Then
I
you
like spitting out rooks.
then you get a pawn on f4 and maybe enough counter.
Why can't I go bishop takes e5, just c2? Yeah, that's problems. Okay,
And then I take on e5 and then I come back.
I understand.
So, well, just some move forcing.
Rook d6 is the line we're
rook
looking at.
6, yeah, just some move forcing the pawn to promote, go somewhere, give the rook for the queen, and then take on e5, and this looks kind of drawish.
Yeah, not sure I'd
Goes
fancy
well.
this with white here.
Take,
You
take,
have piece
it's a
down
draw.
and you have to be precise to make a draw.
Do you really? Yeah, well, white is not going to win, that's clear.
No.
But probably
No,
not
difficult decisions for Maya. We keep an eye on that one for sure. And a lot of difficult decisions for Kramnik. Or maybe all decisions are easy because his position is kind of lost and passive anyway, so he can just keep making moves and hope nothing too bad happens. But I do expect him to lose that one. Ponomarev played a4, just taking away the knight b5 option, and maybe in the future he wants to go b4, b5, rook back to f8. And yeah,
b4 would be a sensible continuation.
b4 is sensible enough. Rook e5, I
Rook
also
e5,
like that
yeah.
move.
But then there's some queen c2 check, maybe.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Well,
rook
not
e2.
such a big problem. Maybe also king h3. h3 seems to be a good spot for the king in many lines. Well, something like that. Well, the game is going to continue for quite some time, but white definitely has some good winning chances.
Yeah, it's not going to be decided anytime soon, but black doesn't really have any compensation for the pawn, and I would expect Ponomarev, who is a great technician, to convert this position, and I'm probably Kramnik is not that. Well, I'm sure he doesn't want to lose, but his motivation could probably
Yeah.
be higher than after a terrible tournament, having
Yeah.
to defend a terrible position. What are the
Right.
scores? I know Caruana won with 5.5 out of 7, which is quite impressive. Congratulations to Mr. Caruana. Also passed 2800. Who's in second place? Leko has like +1, 6 draws and a win against Nidich.
Yes, Leko is on 4,
Okay.
and Nidich is on 3.5.
So if Nidich
So
won, he
if-
would take clear second.
Yeah, if he drew, then he would share second place.
And if
you know
Nidich
how the
loses, he would
tiebreak
lose to
rules
Meyer,
are?
who then would move to 4.
Yeah. So Peter Leko is going to be joined in second place, or maybe even overtaken by either of the German internationals. So
I don't think they have tiebreak rules, or at least they aren't that important to anyone when it doesn't come to
Yeah.
first place. In Dortmund, traditionally, prices, there are no prices. There is starting money, but no prices, so they aren't that interested in who finishes in what spot.
interesting insights here from a former participant in this tournament. 2 times, right?
That's right, good old days.
Once you became second, and the other one,
Once I became second, and
we
the other
will talk
time
about the rest.
didn't go so well.
So, bad tournament for Vladimir Kramnik at this point in time, and a very great tournament for Fabiano Caruana.
I think no matter how the Kramnik game ends, it will be a bad tournament for him.
Yeah, well, if he wins, then
Yeah,
it's fine. Well, it's kind of okay. But
I would give you odds on Kramnik winning.
Oh, I know you would.
Case.
So that gives us the opportunity to finally check out another tournament, which is the ACP Bergamo. Have you heard anything about this tournament, Jan?
No, I wanted to check out the B tournament, as we call the Twitter sphere, but there's not much action. David Melandri is saying, watched your intro to how to build your 1D4 repertoire. Should I go premium? You should absolutely go premium, not necessarily because of my series, they are crap between you and me, but there's a lot of good stuff out there. Anand Svedler, Robin van Kampen, Lawrence Trent. Trent is kind of as well. But obviously we're a little biased, but check it out. And I think you're getting very, very good value for it. And of course we have a lot of stuff in the pipeline which will be coming out soon. If you're capable of speaking German, like the two of us are, even though, yeah, some more, some less, you have access to a lot of great series by Grandmaster Ilya Zaragatsky, who in spite of his Russian-sounding name represents Germany, as do I with my Swedish-sounding name. Such a globalized world. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is. That's the third millennium we're living in. Everybody's coming from everywhere together in Germany. So do we
look at that guy. There's Vichy on the screen. I met him yesterday. He was in good spirits.
Did he also play a little simul?
Yeah, he had to carry our team because we were all blundering left and right. But then at some point, Paco Vallejo, also a dear co-worker, he was also there. He got a bit bored, so he offered draws on like 20 boards in a row, and everybody accepted it to get rid of it more quickly. But in his defense, it was like 80 degrees Celsius. So we do understand. No, but Vichy was in very good spirits. Going to play the Bilbao tournament. Of course, he's preparing for Mr. Magnus Carlsen. And just with Vichy, before the candidates, there was also a lot of talk about, is he going to retire? Why is he still playing? He's washed up and so on. And all that talk all of a sudden disappeared, and he's a challenger to the World Championship. So I wouldn't rule it out with Kramnik, who is a bunch of years younger than Anand even.
Yeah, so let's not make any premature conclusions also about Vladimir Kramnik and his shape. Well,
he is in terrible shape. I think we can agree on that.
Are you speaking chess-wise or figure-wise?
No, chess-wise. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, I think it could turn around at any point.
Right. So now finally, let's go to Bergamo. It is an interesting.
Have you been to Bergamo?
No, I have been to Milan, which is like 20 or 30 kilometers or something next to Bergamo. Actually, I think, do they have an airport? It's possible I used their airport once.
Milan has an airport.
No, but Bergamo. Like, you know, one of those Ryanair, EasyJet kind of airports. I think, if I'm not mixing it up, I think I landed in Bergamo once when I was going for a trip to Milan. So, nevertheless, there is a tournament in Bergamo, which is also quite strong and very interesting. There are 7 participants, which is very, very strange at the first sight. But the idea of the tournament is that each round, the player who has a bye is responsible for commentating the games, like the two of us, just probably not as good.
Yeah, I think it's run by, I'm not sure this is true, but organized by a guy called Yuri Garrett, who was also involved with the Reggio Emilia tournaments. I remember I played there once, and they had the same concept, that you had free day where you had to do commentary, which I think it's a good idea.
It is organized by ACP, which is the Association of Chess Professionals, and there has been a tournament in 2012 in Amsterdam with the very same format. And as it turns out, their goal is to do just to do something different. And the president of the ACP, which is none other than Emil Sutovsky, playing with the white pieces in this game.
He tried to do something different and got checkmated.
that's also something that can happen. So yeah, they're trying to come up with a new, different concept. And when being asked the question if or what would be useful ways to popularize chess more and to maybe make it even more interesting for other kinds of media like television and this kind of stuff, which is a trend we have been observing in the last years, especially with Magnus Carlsen being that successful. He simply replied, "Well, I don't know if that's actually a desirable outcome. I don't know if chess should not instead just stay in its niche and well, remain the kind of sport that it is." What do you think about that, Jan?
Well, I disagree. Media attention is good for any sport or any game. It will create new talents, it will create more sponsorship, more attention. And of course there is some trade-off with it, which some chess purists don't like. Like sometimes it means a shortened time control, sometimes it means more distractions by having to give interviews, and the level of chess analysis, of course, on mainstream TV, like even on our broadcast, it's pretty low, but in Norwegian TV, for example, of course, it has to be lower. So some people are worried that the game might lose its scientific aspect. I wouldn't agree, because in order to be a top player, you have to be quite in touch with the scientific aspect as well. But it doesn't mean they can coexist. And yeah, they have these adjourned games in Bergamo, which certainly if you want to keep chess in its niche, that's a good way to go, because I don't think mainstream media, they would be very happy to have to wait for a day and then be told, oh sorry, this game wasn't decided, it's adjourned till the next day. You don't see that a lot in other sports, except for crazy sports like cricket and stuff. That's fiddler follows, which takes ages.
They don't get adjourned though. Yeah, this is another speciality of this tournament, the adjournment of games, and there have been 3 games adjourned. 2 of them have been actually taken up back again after well, on the free day, which is supposed to be the day where adjourned games will be continued, and one of them was just simply claimed a draw by both opponents while watching the World Championship football final, Germany versus Argentina. Probably in a good mood, both opponents. They just
well,
said...
you can agree on a draw in adjourned games. It's not illegal.
Of course. I just found that an interesting fact to be mentioned. Well, probably one of the players was a little bit better and could have tried on, but it seems like this adjournment thingy is just a little nuisance, and instead players would rather prefer to have a free day. So in this day and age, it is quite questionable if adjourned games are really...
Well, the main problem is the computer, really. Like, I had some adjourned games as a junior player, and there I felt they made some sense, because at least you're forced to analyze normally an ending or something like that, and you learn something about chess. But nowadays you just switch on your engine and let it calculate as deeply as possible, and then repeat what it says. So there is less of a learning effect in adjourned games, and I think they have died out with good reason.
Yeah, I
like
agree.
The dinosaurs.
Actually, now I have come to remember that I had the pleasure of playing one adjourned game in my life. Well, playing is something of an exaggeration, because I had a good position, probably winning position, and my opponent resigned when it came to adjourning it. But yeah, when I was really, really young, like 9 or 10 or something, there's still adjourned games were still around.
Yeah,
So,
I'm a bit older
but
than
actually
you,
that's...
so I had a couple.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So that's the time where it stopped, actually, when I was 10, so 18 years ago.
Quite a while ago.
With Fritz 3 being on the market, right? And
Can't remember which one.
refuting all the grandmasters. Yeah, that was one of the first engines that I got, at least. Mephisto Advantage, or Advantage. It's one of those. You know,
You were always cutting edge.
back in the days, well, I won some youth tournaments, and a very popular prize for the first place was this chess computer, you know, Kasparov thingy.
Oh yeah,
That
it's on
where you
Mephisto.
yeah
And
Mephisto and
high-tech.
Kasparov exactly, where you exert the moves on the board and then the computer. It's like those. Have you seen those machines playing against people, like those robot arms being connected to a computer?
Yeah, I read some article. Kramnik, they had some in Russia, right?
Yeah. Kramnik played against one, and there's a famous YouTube clip of Grishuk playing against one.
Right.
Do you know this one? And well, the computer having only like 3 fingers, or something that is supposed to resemble fingers. Whenever it captures a piece, it first takes the piece, throws it in the box next to the board, and then puts his very own piece on this very square. So at some point, Grishuk took something on c4 and expected the computer to recapture, but the computer exchanged rooks on e8 in between. And the robot arm, it flew to e8 just to take off this rook, and Grishuk seems to have been in well, very, very scared, and he jumped back away like the computer or the robot was trying to kill him. Very, very funny. With a very funny facial expression, and then only after a couple of seconds he came to understand that the computer was just taking a rook and not trying to kill him, actually.
Let's briefly address the position we have on the board. After rook g3, Emil Sutovsky had to resign because after rook takes d2, Black will just bring in the reinforcements with rook cc3, and all these heavy pieces in front of your king normally do spell disaster.
Note that rook d8 fails to queen takes d8. Otherwise, tables would turn.
That's right.
Right.
So, who won this tournament? I haven't followed Bergamo all that closely, I have to admit. Do we know that?
Yeah,
Normally
I
Wesley
know
So
it.
wins all the tournaments.
Yeah, he did, of course.
Ah, see? It's easy to remember as long as it's always the
Very,
same guys.
very relaxed +3 score for Wesley So. Making his way straight to the top 10 now, crossing the 2750 border. Well, very strong player who is now studying in, what is it?
Webster University in St. Louis.
Louis.
He wasn't invited to this St. Louis tournament yet, which I think will be probably the strongest tournament of all time, with Carlsen, Aronian, Caruana, Nakamura, Vashiela Graf, and Kayakin. I think that's the field. Not sure if I forgot anyway, I don't think so. And yeah, I'm sure Wesley So is a bit annoyed he didn't make that one, but if his rating keeps climbing like that, he will probably be a regular in these very super tournaments very soon. Another cute final position which caught my eye is the Nepomniachtchi against Vocaturo. Vocaturo, a bit little unknown but pretty strong dynamic player from Italy, quite young still, beat Nepomniachtchi, and this final position is quite nice, I think. It's Zugzwang. Wherever white goes with his king, black can go knight h5, distracting this knight, and get a queen. And queen against knight is pretty good for black. Same with king h4, knight f5. Or not h5 if you want to be fancy, but...
Knight h5 also works though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's more forcing. Yeah, we can see a recurring pattern here actually, which is that the knight has tremendous trouble to fight with the rook pawn.
Yeah, remember that. That's very important to keep in mind in all kinds of endings.
Because
I don't like rook pawns.
Yeah, because usually rook pawns are not the most dangerous pawns in whatever ending, at whatever ending you look, except when there's a knight that has to be fighting against a rook pawn. Then they are quite an asset.
Yeah, and the reason is the knight can only fight it from one side of the board, because the board ends at the H file. There is no IKL files. I'm not so good with the ABC, but I made up some letters next to it, so the knight can't go around to the other side as it could fighting any other pawn.
There is a chess variant though where you can just continue on the other side of the board. What's it called? Beam chess or something? You know, like you can if your rook is on h1, you can. Well, that's a bad example. If your knight is on h1, you can jump to a3, for example, right? Or cylinder chess. There's all kinds of crazy chess variants. There's, well, don't wanna.
I don't play any of them.
Of
Being
course you don't.
a very serious player, I think they're all bad for your chess because they give you ideas that don't work in real games.
Don't you think that Backhaus is kind of, well, it's not bad actually because it makes your chess creativity grow.
I play a bit of Backhaus, admittedly, but I think even that is dangerous. If you play it too much,
Well,
you
if
start
you play it
thinking
right
in
before the
Backhaus
round, then you,
themes during the game.
you keep thinking in Backhaus terms. But if you play it like a couple of days before, then it might actually help. So Jan, this guy called also kind of Jan or Ian. What was his last name?
Which guy?
Well, the guy who just lost the game against Daniele Vocaturo.
Nepomniachtchi.
Do you want me to
Very
teach you?
good. Okay, well, how would you pronounce it?
Well, the correct pronunciation is actually Nepomniachtchi. Nepomniachtchi.
I
Yeah.
learned it's Nepomniachtchi.
No, it's Nepomniachtchi.
Because in
Or
the
is it?
West, because
Is
it's
it
spelled
actually?
funnily, we tend to overpronounce it like Nepomniachtchi. I was told it's Nepomniachtchi.
Well, actually, we might be right. But
Anytime you have
it's
Russian questions, let me know, Mr. Zaragatsky.
right. We'll come back to that. But you're pronouncing the sh quite well.
That's what I do. I struggle with the R's, but the sh's, I'm very good at.
Yeah, sometimes it's spelled, well, in German at least, SCHTSCH, just
Yeah,
for
it
one
feels like a
for
waste
one
of
sound.
letters, right?
Yeah.
It's just sh.
Yeah.
So, no sh in Ponomaryov, but an R, which I don't like much. A4, Rook F8, he's still taking his time. Can play any sensible move he likes, B4, Queen E2, Rook E5, keeping his advantage. But is probably looking for more of a long-term concept. So we can use the waiting time. As usual, my favorite part of the show is reading out people's tweets. Anthony Cunningham is asking any news on venue for World Chess Championship match, and will Vichy have a chance? Not a lot of news on venue. I think this Sochi, which was announced by FIDE, is still the favorite to make it. I'm not sure. There's all the contract work and so on has been ironed out, but I haven't heard anything contrary, so I would operate under the assumption it's going to happen in Russia in Sochi. And will Vichy have a chance? We will see. I haven't asked him over the weekend if he has a chance, and probably it would have been a bit of a rude question. I think he's going to have a much better chance than last time around. First of all, because he has the experience of the last match, and secondly, because he must be a slightly different player with the confidence he regained winning the candidates, a win he hadn't had for a while. So I would expect a closer match. But of course, one has to say Magnus Carlsen is not the world number one and rated 28.77 or whatever he is for nothing. So he will be the favorite in any match at this point in time. But still, I think it will be closer and more interesting than the last one, if candidates Vichy shows up and not last match Vichy.
Right. What would you think about a side match? Not only for the crown amongst men, but also amongst women, between Judith Polgar and Hu Yifan, who is making an attempt to overtake Judith Polgar in the official rating list. That has been quite a favorite, quite a popular topic since Hu Yifan, who is now playing in Biel quite successfully. Well, she's gaining elo point after elo point and making her way to the top.
She overtook me, which is the most upsetting part of this whole story.
Also maybe an interesting match.
I'm not so sure it's that interesting. But yeah, to get back to the topic, I think everyone would love to see a Polgar-Hu Yifan match. And I even think Polgar, if the offer was right, she wouldn't mind. But of course, I think it would be kind of incorrect to just stage the match and call it a World Championship match, even though no one will really argue Polgar has been the strongest female player for the last, I don't know, 20 years. She would still have to qualify in a way, right? Like, I think it would be wrong to just say, okay, let's stage this match.
Yeah.
I don't like the women's World Championship cycle. I almost only said cycle, but Trent made some stupid jokes about that. The Women's World Championship cycle much because they have this knockout tournament every second year, which makes it very, very hard for the world champion to defend their title. If you have to start in a knockout tournament, the odds are very bad. And I would prefer if they switched to the same system as the men have with matches, be it annual or biannual. So I wouldn't mind seeing that change, and we certainly would all love to see the Polgar Hu Yifan match. But I think they would have to establish some kind of system. And about the chances, I'm not sure. Polgar hasn't been that active. Hu Yifan recently has looked very, very strong. So I wouldn't be surprised if Hu Yifan had a very good shot already at beating Polgar.
Well, right now she probably does, but once Judith has the chance to prepare for this match and to get some practice going, then, well, actually I would bet for Judith Polgar.
Well,
She is quite a talented girl.
I think no one's arguing that she's the greatest player in history. But like they say, in chess your brain is a muscle and you gotta work it out, which Hu Yifan has been doing more recently, and clearly time is in her favor. She's a much younger, more motivated, more active player. So the sooner the match happens, the better probably Judith's chances. But who knows if she's really interested in it. She has nothing to prove, really. And she will always be the greatest player in female chess history. Oh, Twitter.
Okay.
Mark Trevor Smith, Russian-sounding name, says, Jan is right about Nepo pronunciation. That's how Nepo himself says it. Yeah, I feel I have an edge in these Russian name discussions against you.
I won't contest these kind of questions anymore.
That's all right.
Yeah, I admit defeat.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thanks.
Don Hugo is saying, I dream of being 2800 like Fabiano Caruana. Don Hugo is an engine on Chess 24, right?
Yes.
He's not 2800.
Have you ever played against him?
I've played him a lot.
Oh, really?
Sometimes he checkmates me, but I have a decent overall score.
Well, I'm having troubles promoting in the top lists of Chess 24. People are really playing some serious chess there,
People are tough.
and it doesn't help to play banter blitz because with all this talking, you forget to make moves.
Yeah, I didn't play all that well while talking about it either. And
Has
I'm
that
very
already
slow.
been published, by the way?
I have no idea. I don't think it has.
Well, then you guys have something great to be looking forward to. Jan playing chess and commentating. And since I have been sitting in the very same room while he recorded those sessions, I can tell you that it is really something. It is quite entertaining and quite...
Quite horrible.
no, it's actually good chess. You hardly missed any tactical resources, very solid chess. Well, you just like to flag your opponents from time to time. That's the downside, but other than that, it's really lehrreich.
Instructive.
Instructive. It is really instructive.
It's
So
really nice.
it is. So yeah, definitely keep your eyes open for that.
Is Georg Mayer going to do something instructive? He's taking a lot of time. I think he's deciding between the moves we mentioned, Bishop E1 and Rook B1.
Yeah. Do you
And-
think he's trying to find a clear way to draw now, or do
I'm
you
not
think
sure.
he's
I
looking
think
for
first
his
he has
chances?
to evaluate if he can play for a win or if he has to bail out to make a draw. Here's an exchange up, so you could very well argue that you look for more. I just can't really see it. I think black's pawns are just too dangerous. So I wouldn't be surprised by either of the lines we looked at with Bishop E1 when the best move is Rook D4. And now Bishop takes B4, Knight takes C1, Rook takes C1, Bishop B7 with a likely draw. Or after King G6, Rook B1, the other line we were looking at C3 with a bit of a mess. Rook takes B4, Rook D6, very precise
This is
move.
probably what's taking a lot of time.
Yeah, yes.
This
he's
is not
calculating lines
trivial.
like this. and it's messy. It should also end in a draw and equality, but it is a huge mess.
Actually, he's not
They have
taking time. They have made a couple of
Made
moves.
a couple moves.
Yeah.
Bishop E1 has been played. Rook to D4, all as we predicted. Bishop B4, knight C1, correct again. Rook C1, bishop B7. This happened, and a draw is likely here. Rook E4, king D2, check, king C3, bishop D5. Material is equal. Black is a bit more coordinated, but with the opposite color bishops, and white's passed pawn. I doubt that white could end up in trouble here. Maybe black could if he lets his a-pawn run, but
The a-pawn might really prove dangerous, and then there's a spare pass pawn on g5. Because black's passers, they don't look as dangerous, but
that's true. G3,
let's see what
king
happens.
E4. Maybe knight did complicate his life here a little bit, actually, yeah. Because this
that's
is
the
a very...
position, the current position.
Could be good for white. This is a very instructive theme, actually. If the bishop manages to control the passed pawns on the same diagonal, then they're normally not that dangerous. So this bishop is very well placed, not only defending h4, but stopping both the e and the c pawn. And white could already take the c pawn if he wanted to, or he could go rook a1. And yeah, all of a sudden it looks like Meyer generated some chances. Not sure
Let's
how that
just
happened.
imagine in this position the rooks were exchanged. Then what you said very much applies. The bishop on e1 controls both passers, and white is free to just run around to b8 and queen his pawn. And there's not so much black can do, because with his bishop he has to protect or to stop white from queening with the a-pawn, and with his king he has to stop the pawn on g5.
Yeah, that shows the difference. The bishop can't control the g5 pawn and the a7 pawn at the same time, so black needs both his pieces, while the white king is free for action because the bishop can't stop them. Of course, we're not there yet. There are still
So
rooks
maybe
on the board.
Rook c3 is an idea here,
Yeah,
even though we
but
don't
you
threaten
wanna
to take.
Take on d3.
So what's the problem with taking on c4? Rook
d7 is picking up the pawn. Right?
Okay, we don't want to give away this pawn, and if we take with the king, then it's
So
probably
story,
rook
rook
a3.
a3.
Interesting.
That's why
So
rook a1 is good.
That's why rook c3 I like, with the idea of playing king to take c4.
Also possible.
Yeah, looks good. So where did he go wrong, actually?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because here the position really looks quite equal. For starters, I think this knight is an
why not just
optimistic
play
guy. He
c3,
could have
yeah?
gone c3 and exchanged the a-pawn. with
Overly
a clear draw.
optimistic, maybe.
But I think he tried to play for a win here and kept coordinating his pieces, which might or might not backfire. Because c3, and if, rook takes...
His fighting spirit is quite admirable, but sometimes, well,
It goes both ways. You win some, you lose some. Oh yeah, here, objectively, I
That's
think
just
this
a
was
draw,
been
yeah.
the way to go with just a drawn position. Rook
And
can sit
after-
on a6 and bring the bishop somewhere nice.
No,
It's
it's
just an easy draw.
it's nothing going to happen. There's not enough resources. So after rook d4, king c3, it's already not that easy.
Maybe, yeah.
Interesting. So maybe actually now Georg Meyer has a shot on becoming second.
Right. No matter what, very good tournament for
Yeah.
Meyer. So let's see what happens there. He played bishop c3. Oh no, he played rook a1 first. And after e2, he went bishop c3.
The idea being that rook d1
Here's a check.
is just answered by rook a6 check, and then, well, we want to come to e6.
Well, if you go to f7, g6 check, looks like I'm going to queen one of my guys. So you have to go to f5, and then I'm not sure if g6 works.
Well, rook
or
f6 is good enough, I think. Oh, no, and then go back. See, like that. Rook e6, but maybe even g6 is good.
It wouldn't be surprising.
So,
And yeah, this has been played actually.
Oh,
So knight
Meyer
might be
winning.
in trouble. Yeah, it looks like it's winning objectively. The cheap pawn's
Interesting.
just too strong.
very interesting game. First it all went to white's favor, and then suddenly it was black who seemed to have the slightly upper hand, and then again Meyer took over the control, and now he's definitely in the driver's seat.
Absolutely. After king f5, you can also just go g6. Black were to get a queen takes. Oh no, I'm sorry.
Why not? Rook e8, yeah. Take g7,
G7, that's rook g1.
rook g1, rook e8.
I thought you had this cute idea, but here you just take and king takes g7. But if we are sneaky after g6, e1 queen, we can probably give this check first.
And we are sneaky.
King e4 takes, and here rook e6 would decide. While if king g4 takes, and g7 wins.
And then rook e8, either rook f8 or rook g6.
Right. So rook a6, he has played king f5, and it looks like g6 is pretty much winning here. Threatening rook f6 check, followed by g7,
Well,
rook f8.
Actually,
All
he has
kinds
the
of
choice.
unpleasantness.
He has the choice between g6 and rook f6. Both look very winning.
Absolutely.
Great. Good for him.
We'll
So
keep an eye
while
on
he's
that.
choosing amongst one of these two moves, let's go back to Ponomariov versus
Excellent.
Kramnik. Just wanted to throw in that I'm totally illiterate in Russian.
That's all right. And David Melandri, congratulations. He says, I did it, went premium, enjoying your 1D4 series. Thanks, I appreciate that. And yeah, check it out, guys. We have one happy customer, hopefully. Always happy to hear that. Thanks, David.
Best thing is we're not going to be unemployed in the near future.
No, we gotta keep the lights running in the studio, of course, this show, and most of the stuff we do is for free, but of course it does help us if you become a premium member, so we can keep these burningly hot lights on. Oof. It really is a warm day in Hamburg, and I think all over the world.
It is kind of your own fault. Why would you be wearing a shirt and a jacket?
The thing is, I only wore the shirt on the train ride, which I described earlier, for 6 hours, so I will leave
I
the rest to your
understand.
imagination.
I do have some spare shirts somewhere around here. Do you
Yeah,
think
but
you
I
will
think
fit?
your style is more metrosexual than mine.
Maybe that is also a factor, but maybe you will just let them burst. Let my shirts
Right.
burst with all your muscular upper body strength.
Mogans Nielsen says, Polga will never participate in a women's tournament, an old decision. I'm not sure that's true. I've read some interviews where she said if it was the right challenge and Hu Yifan could be the right challenge and of course the right conditions, she would not be opposed to it. The old decision was more made on the basis that in order to become a top player, she had to compete with men because the level back then was higher in the men's tournaments. But I'm not sure it's an never ever play a match against Hu Yifan kind of decision. I don't think there is.
Maybe tournament is not the same as a match. So that is a special occasion. But yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
everybody can be bought with a huge pile of money.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say? Would you be bought with a huge pile of money?
Depends for what, but in general, yes. Absolutely. Even a medium-sized pile of money. Contact me, and I'm very open to, what's the word? Corruption, basically.
Oh, it's very noble of you to
Yeah,
say
just
that
so
out
you guys
loud.
know.
Just, oh, man.
No
we're
problem.
honest people here.
J. Hillary Brown is saying, Wesley said he won't play in big tournaments for a while because he's in the final stage of changing his federations. I'm not sure that stops him from playing in big tournaments. Actually, I don't know the rules, but I think it only applies to national competitions like the Olympiad, where he wanted to play for the US, which is the federation he wants to change to, but that did not go through in time. The Philippines weren't that happy with him changing federations. So he can't play in that one. I'm not sure. I don't think he has to sit out private tournaments in that period. I think it's mainly FIDE international competitions. But actually it would be good to know. I'm not quite sure what the rules are there. The federations don't agree. I think you have to sit out for 2 years from international official competitions. Welcome back. Apologies for that. A small memory problem, which we suffer on this show all the time. I can't even remember who won Dortmund like minutes after. That was a lie. Fabiano Caruana won with 5.5 out of 7. Congratulations. We will actually go on a short break, and then we will be right back with you to wrap up the Dortmund tournament, where Ponomaryov is still trying to beat Kramnik. Georg Mayer might have reached a winning position against Arkady Naidic all of a sudden. We'll keep you updated, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thanks for watching.
See you in a bit.
Welcome back to Chess 24, everybody. My name is Jan Gustafsson, and I'm thrilled to be joined by the very handsome, very witty Mr. Ilya Zaragatsky. We are in the final stages of our broadcast. The Dortmund tournament, only 7 rounds, is about to be over. Fabiano Caruana won with a crushing 5.5 out of 7, got his rating above 2800 in the process, and he tweeted, won Dortmund with 5.5, got my rating to 2800, not a bad week overall. He's happy, and there are still 2 games ongoing, actually one just finished. One guy who's not happy is going to be Vladimir Kramnik. He lost his last Ponomaryov and finishes on 2.5 out of 7. Is that right?
I don't know. Let's check the standings so
I
we
think
don't
that's
lie.
We never lie. We just don't know a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's actually true. So it's -2 for Vladimir Kramnik without having won a single game. Unprecedented in the history of chess. Well, probably not, but very, very rare. So let's have a little wrap up of this game. I think we left it at this point.
Queen e2.
Queen e2. There's no rush. White can do whatever he likes to, just to improve his position very, very slowly. He maneuvers his queen back to c4, king to h7, and here, oh, maybe king h7 is already a mistake.
Oh, the position is very rough.
It is tough. Sooner or later, black is going to make less than perfect moves, and then white will probably strike. So rook e5, queen f6. Now the queen goes back to this diagonal, and we see that g6 is quite a weakness there, and knight h5 is maybe already possible, just to try jumping at black's king side. Queen f8 and rook f1, then maybe the queen is coming to g6, just sacrificing the pawn on d4, but of course that is quite a risky decision.
Well,
so
no need for it really. Ponomaryov played rook 1 e4, and he just keeps all his pieces in dominant positions, and long term black is just hopeless here. And his knight h5, rook g4 is still in the air. Rook f8, Ponomaryov still taking it slow. Queen e2 just keeps improving. This is instructive because he maneuvered. He has plenty of good moves. This is quite instructive because he maneuvered to set his pieces up in the correct way on the open file, which is you want the rooks in front and then the queen behind it to do maximum damage. You can infiltrate with the rooks first. So he spent a couple moves getting that in, putting his rooks on e5, e4, and the queen behind. And now it's gonna come to an end soon. Rook d8, he went rook e7.
And here's when we see the power of this setup, this super battery, if you want to call it like that. Now white is controlling the 7th rank, and knight h5 is a very serious threat, and it's not so easy for black to come up with some kind of a defense.
It's pretty much game over, let's face it.
He exchanged and played knight
d5.
to d5.
Here white can already choose how he wants to finish the game. Queen e6 check. Queen takes e6 as a cute tactics. For example, rook takes g7 if you're feeling frisky.
Not only is white 2 pawns up here, but he's even winning a 3rd pawn. So
that wasn't bad.
quite convincing too, but rook e8 is also
Does the job as well.
not wrong. He takes on d5.
Yeah, if rook takes e8, he has the cute little queen takes e8, queen e8, knight f6, and the pawn ending would be easily winning. Just bring the king to the center.
So rook takes d5 instead, and rook to b8.
Just rook b8, and
Not only threatening queen e8 mate, but also hitting this b7 pawn, and now
so
it becomes obvious that black is in very dire straits. So he took on d4 last try, but it turns out that after queen e8 check, king f6, simply rook takes b7, white king will hide on h3.
yeah, it's
Feel
only one
very
check.
homey there, yeah. And then it's white's turn again, and there's all kinds of checks, not on g7, but everywhere there's checks for black king, and white is also pawn up.
Yeah, Kramnik played queen takes c5, but then resigned without waiting for example, rook f7, king g6, rook f8, king h7, rook h8, checkmate.
Very nice.
Yeah,
Yeah. What can you say? Vladimir Kramnik, very unhappy with his tournament probably.
and with this loss, I think he's out of the top 10, which is pretty much unprecedented in the last, don't let me lie, 15 years. I think it might be the first time Kramnik falls out of the top 10.
So instead of
I'm not sure
Kramnik,
that's true, actually. He might still hang on to the number 10 spot, barely. We would have to check.
but he has definitely been overtaken by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, who's playing Biel quite successfully and is now 11 points in front of Vladimir Kramnik. Who would have guessed that?
Yeah, Vachier-Lagrave, he keeps establishing himself as one of the world's best. He's already at a 2770 live rating and really became a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
Kramnik, it looks like he's still clinging to the number 10 spot, tied with Lenier Dominguez, the Cuban guy. So he's not out yet, but definitely 2760, quite low for him. We haven't seen him drop that low for a while.
And the next guy who's following them is actually none other than Wesley So, who
up
gained
there.
another 11 points
Number 12 already.
and has breached the 2750 barrier, which I remember he has tweeted about. He has actually tweeted that, well, after his win in Havana, a tournament where I have been taking part to, well, not the super strong grandmaster tournament, but the open tournament, in April, was it April or May, a couple of months ago. And after this tournament, where he has been finishing in the first spot, quite convincingly too, he has tweeted that with some luck and the help of God, he's going to breach 2750 in the course of this year. And it seems that
Looks like God reads Twitter. He made his wish come true, and it
I
doesn't
think
look
also
like he's stopping now.
God has a Twitter account.
The tweet of God, yeah, I read that one.
Yeah.
It's,
So he must be a follower of Wesley So. And it's 2755 and the year has still a couple of months. So maybe 2800 should be the next goal.
We'll see. We'll stay tuned to his Twitter account and, of course, to our Twitter hashtag C24Live. Let us know what you guys are up to. Mark Trevor Smith is saying, what is he saying? Just for the record, each of you is a better commentator than Trent, and together you're more than twice as good. No, we do love our our Trent here, and he's unfortunately playing a chess tournament himself, so he can't be with us. But we do appreciate that you're enjoying the show. Sorry, though, we're not getting rid of Mr. Lawrence Trent anytime soon.
I'm just going to be the
might
substitute
just keep them.
forever and ever. Just when one of you guys doesn't feel like it, I have to jump in. That's my fate. I have to live with
I don't see
it.
it like that at all. I see it more like you're a busy man and you're doing all this great stuff for the German
I'm
unit.
doing
so
all the stuff in the background. Without that, everything would be falling apart.
right, another.
And I'm also very modest. That's another one of my qualities.
It's one of your main qualities, your
Okay.
humbleness.
Humble.
Another thing that fell apart is Arkady Naidic's position, who has
over.
lost his game to Georg Meyer, which, yeah, it looked like after a very sharp battle they had reached an equal position. We've mentioned this earlier, that instead of rook d4 check, he could have just forced a draw with c3 check. I think Naidic played for a win, and it did backfire. We've seen the position after rook a6 check, king f5. We mentioned both g6 and rook f6 are winning here. Played rook f6, king e4, and just rook f8, which pretty much does the trick.
Yeah, very clever move. On the one hand, attacking the bishop on a8, and on the other hand, giving white the option of always playing rook e8 check, for example, if black queens here. Just take the guy and play rook e1 check. Even rook takes a8 might be sufficient, but
Yeah.
that is just very simple.
So instead he tried rook b1 check, but it's too little too late. King takes c4, rook c1. Last trick trying to get this e-pawn going. But rook e8 check, king f3. And here white unleashes his next weapon, the g-pawn, which is too much for black. g7, g6, bishop c6, just g7. And after bishop takes e8, which was not played, white queen would check on a8. So can't do that. Instead, I think he tried rook g1 and resigned at the same time, because g8 queen would be a pretty effective move here, with game over.
Quite a fashionable strategy to make a move and then resign in this very round of the Dortmund tournament.
It's true.
And looking at the table, we see that Georg Meyer actually has done it and has moved himself up to the second spot in the tournament, which he's sharing with Peter Leko. Since we don't know the tie breaks, we're just going to say they share second and third place. And this win in particular was very, well, psychologically maybe even important for Georg Meyer, who beat Germany's number one, Arkady Naidic, and thereby, well, kind of underlined his ambitions in the German national team, maybe even. Do you think he's going to be playing first board in the Olympiad now for Germany?
No, I don't think so. Naidic is still much higher rated. I think Meyer has a decent score against Naidic, but Naidic is still the only German 2700. Also didn't have a bad tournament himself, finished on 50%, but he did push his luck too hard in this last round, and he did get punished for it. Maybe we can briefly bring up the final standings, Mr. Producer. Is that possible? Dortmund is over. Only 7 rounds. Was a bit of a sprint of a tournament. And Fabiano Caruana, of course, the big victor, finished with 5.5 out of 7, really destroying the field. Had 5 out of 6, took it easy today. Plus 4. Yeah.
1-4, drew 3. That is dominance.
Absolutely. Then, yeah, Meyer and Leko tied second with 4 out of 7. Naidic and Adams both on 50%, 3.5 out of 7. Ponomarev, even though he won today, has 3 out of 7 minus 1. And at the bottom of the table, surprisingly, Vladimir Kramnik with 2.5 out of 7, while David Baramitse finished last in his first super tournament with 2 out of 7. Some surprise there, especially former victors Adams, Ponomarev and Kramnik, who all won the Dortmund tournament. I think in the last 3 years, those were the 3 winners, all on a minus score. No, Adams on 50%, the other 2 on a minus score. You can see it there on the screen. And yeah, basically Fabiano Caruana's star just keeps rising and rising. He's been playing well in all the latest tournaments. Sometimes the final score didn't reflect it so much, but this one he's really just been superior to the field, and it shows in the final outcome.
Yeah, I remember in the super strong tournament of Stavanger, he started off with 2 out of 2, and then ended up with plus minus 0. But he could have gone another way if he would have continued his play, and then even won maybe this tournament, which at that point in time was one of the the strongest tournament in the history of chess. But now, as you have mentioned, St. Louis is, is planning to take away the spot.
Well, it's an unfair comparison because St. Louis is only a 6-players tournament, while in Norway they had 10 players and also a second local guy which messed a little bit with the rating average. Still a fantastic event. And yeah, Karana, he's been getting a bit unlucky, or however you want to call it, in last rounds. In the Shamkir Gashimov Memorial, he lost the last game to Magnus Carlsen and therefore didn't win the tournament. In Norway chess, he lost the last round to Kayakin, who then won the tournament from a good position. So this time around, he could afford to making a quick draw to win the tournament, which he had already won yesterday. And yeah, it's been very dominant on 2800. Looks certainly like a Carlsen challenger in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
The current Carlsen challenger is Vishy Anand, whom I met yesterday. He's watching our show a lot, he told me, which of course we appreciate. I'll keep encouraging him to tweet us his thoughts. I'm sure people would be interested.
Well, just as Garry Kasparov sometimes does.
That's right.
So Vishy Anand and Garry Kasparov watching our show. So everyone who's watching now is actually in quite good company. I'm kind of nervous with all those famous people watching us.
Don't worry about it. And I think
you still have everything under control, right?
No, but what's the fun if we're in control all the time? People want us to embarrass ourselves.
Yeah,
and
right.
we excel at that.
There is a beauty in chaos sometimes.
Right. Anyway, I think we'll wrap it up. We would like to thank everybody for staying with us through this slightly shorter Dortmund coverage. 7-round sprint. We also had a bit of a sprint here. I would like to thank Ilya Zaragatsky, Lawrence Trent, the producer, Macaulay Peterson, working around the clock here on weekends, even joining the show himself. And everybody on Chess24 who's been annotating the games, check out the news sites where we have coverage of the events as well. It's been fun as usual, and we'll see you guys on the next broadcast, which I think will be none other than the Chess Olympiad. Very much looking forward to that one.
Right, so I won't be there. It's going to be Lawrence Trent with Jan Gustafsson, our old live commentating dream team. But there will come a time where I will be needed as a substitution again, and I will jump in when necessary. Yeah, so thanks for watching on my part too, and have a good day. See you soon.